Johnson. Hey! Oh, look. It catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Hi, I'm Kevin O'Sullivan, and I've got a message for you. Welcome back to this blockbuster edition of What Just Happened. It really is a good one, I think. It's so funny that people keep calling me Meghan Markle.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning to you. Welcome to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. It's coming up to 3 minutes past 10 o'clock in the morning. I hope you had a wonderful, wonderful Easter. Hopefully a little bit more relaxing than mine. You know, falling down mountains, you know me. Mostly the falling bit. Anyway, it is great to be back. And as always, quite a lot to talk about, of course. And whether or not you are listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or on your connected device, it's absolutely great to have your company. I've still got the cough. I can't believe I've still got the cough. Do you follow it? Now, I'm going to try and get through this. The meeting of cardinals at the Vatican has now provided an update on plans for the Pope's funeral. They've confirmed it will take place on this Saturday at 9 o'clock UK time. This comes after the death of Pope Francis, of course, on Easter Monday at the age of 88 from a cerebral stroke that led to a coma and irreversible heart failure. Also, Keir Starmer has, in the last half an hour, finally broken his silence on last week's Supreme Court landmark gender ruling. He says, so I'm so sorry. Could someone possibly run in and turn the aircon off in this studio? That will stop me coughing. Thank you very, very much indeed. I was hoping someone might notice that at some point. I do apologise for the cough. I've had this for about 3 months now. It's getting very dull. Anyway, Keir Starmer has finally spoken. He said that the landmark ruling 6 days ago, he says, brings much needed clarity for women. I'm not entirely sure that we needed clarity about who was a man and who was a woman and who could use women's changing rooms and toilets and the like, but apparently we did. Wasn't the lack of clarity brought around by people like Keir Starmer claiming that some women had penises and saying that it was incorrect to say that only women have a cervix? We'll talk about that. Plus, Tory leader Kemi Badenoch has called for the police to act after pro-trans protesters in Westminster on Saturday held up placards calling for women's rights campaigners to be killed and defaced 7 statues of graffiti, including those of Nelson Mandela and the suffragist Millicent Fawcett. Protesters have vowed to take their demonstrations across the country, with a dozen rallies planned for next weekend. Oh, I do hope I can attend one of them. Yeah, really. You shout that stuff at me and let's see how well that goes, guys. Oh, yeah, and you are guys. I know. What a shocker. Plus, NHS Trust has issued staff with a wheel of privilege, I kid you not, which could help them work out how lucky or how marginalised they are. The multicoloured chart forms part of an allyship training module and shows thin, white and comfortably well-off straight people classified as being closest to a central power hub. I would love to hear from you today. Well, when we talk about that in the next half hour or so, if you could tell me where you are on the wheel of privilege, it would be really, really great to know. Anyway, joining me for all the conversation, basically talking between my coughing today, is Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. A very, very good morning to you. I'm still amazed I haven't actually given this cough to you over the many, many months you've been forced and locked into a studio with me for 3 hours at a time. But there we are. I mean, there's so much to talk about. Obviously, we're going to talk a bit about, obviously, the death of the Pope. But I just want to start, because we've just had that statement from Keir Starmer about the Supreme Court ruling. I do want to ask you about that, because Sir Keir Starmer, I mean, 6 days, he was away for some of it on holiday. I do, as you know, reserve the right to not criticise people for going on holiday. He's got a family, etc. But it's the very first time in 6 days he's issued a public comment on the issue, completely echoing, I mean, word for word, the comments that we had last week in the House of Parliament. He said, I welcome the decision of the Supreme Court, which has given us clarity, much needed clarity. And I think for those that are now drawing up guidance, it's a much clearer position. I'm really pleased that the court has now clarified the position. We can move on from there. And I think that's been very helpful. And I would welcome that. Asked whether this means he does not believe a trans woman is in fact a woman, he said, a woman is an adult female, and the court has made that absolutely clear. And then he also suggested guidance needs to be shared to public bodies to ensure everyone follows the ruling, saying we need to move and make sure we now ensure that all guidance is in the right place according to that judgment. Funny thing is, Supreme Court provided clarity on something which anyone sane with eyes, and over the age of 5, or in fact over the age of 5 months, knew men are women and women aren't men. I don't think we've got any clarity there from the Prime Minister.
Well, he certainly feels like he's clearer on this issue, and I think that's sincere. He's struggled very publicly with these questions for a long time.
I mean, it's worrying.
It is interesting, though, the points at which he decided to drop the gender ideology or moderate his position has never been because of his own MPs raising these complaints with him. It wasn't because people like Rosie Duffield, now outside of the party, talking about this issue, talking about how seriously it is and talking about the abuse that she suffered for saying that biological sex is real. He didn't listen to the feminist
From members of her own party?
Absolutely. He didn't listen to the many feminist campaigners, many of whom used to be in the Labour Party aren't in anymore because of this particular issue. He first moderated it when Tony Blair came out and said women don't have penises, and he just said, I agree with Tony. And then
but again, he would not say the words himself.
No, absolutely. I mean, the cowardice is striking. I mean, him saying adult female is as clear as we're going to get from him, I think. But even that is showing him having gone on actually quite a big journey where this issue is concerned.
Again, I've said it a million times, either he genuinely believed, for some reason, for a certain period of his life, that so-called trans women, i.e. trans-identified men, were women, and that some women had a penis because, of course, they were born men. Either he actually believed that. He didn't, presumably, I mean, before this became an issue, like 2012-ish or so, he didn't believe it before then, and he doesn't believe it now because he accepts the court ruling, or he was lying to us all that time, on both grounds, unfit for public office.
No.
I cannot, this is not, I don't care what his views are, I don't care if he was saving the world and was the greatest military leader of all time, unfit for public office. Either stark staring insane, if he believed that, if he actually believed that men were women, insane, or stupid. Let's be generous. Stupid. He's not a stupid man. He's a very highly qualified man.
Cowardice as well, I think, is a big part of this.
I don't accept coward. No, I don't accept coward. I do not. Because when there are women who are like working, as nurses or students, we've spoken to so many people over the years. By the way, long before the likes of Women's Hour and the BBC and everyone else got in on that, going, oh, it turns out this is a big issue. Oh, really? Because we were talking about this for about 10 years before you lot, by the way. But speaking to like young women who've lost their, they've been thrown out of university, women who've lost their jobs simply for saying just the most, the basic facts. There's no hate, no nothing, but in something they tweeted that's got nothing to do with their job. To say that he was cowardly, you didn't have to be cowardly. You could just be solid. I mean, I think Wes Streeting was one of the most solid on this.
Oh, yeah. And to call it cowardly is not to excuse it, of course, but I think it shows just how kind of over a barrel the Labour Party is, where a lot of these woke issues were concerned. The spell is starting to break now. I think they're starting to realise this is a very small number of people who shout very loudly. But I think they just also had this kind of mindset, which is, this is the high status dinner party position, therefore I should genuflect to it, even if I don't properly understand it.
Here's the thing, again, that's like Soviet Union style. That's,
it's terrible.
This is, but that's the thing, it's really, it's not, people used to say to me, this doesn't matter, and look, we're not going to talk about this the whole show, I honestly, I promise you, that this doesn't really matter, what do you care, how many people does it impact? Well, 51% of the population is who it impacts. I mean, on Radio 4 today, they're having somebody going, a barrister talking about the impact of this ruling and how, of course there's concern because, trans people weren't asked about their views. No, because they're irrelevant. This was a ruling of the Supreme Court in relation to women's rights and what is established in law about women's rights. It's about women. It's got sod all to do with men who think they're women. It's about women. Established women's sex-based rights are about women and not about men who think they're women. End of. Nothing to discuss. Move on. And yeah, we needed clarity on that because a load of people like Keir Starmer muddied the water.
Absolutely.
Because you say they're spineless, lying, deceiving fools. And I still find it unforgivable. There are people, a lot of people have been on a journey on things like lockdowns, people on a journey on other things. I find I can forgive an awful lot of things. This, I don't forgive. And I say never forgive, never forget any of the people who were in power at the time of COVID and lockdown, and we now know from Matt Hancock WhatsApps that they didn't even believe in what they were doing. It's just appalling. These people, I mean this seriously, they need to be in prison. They have committed a crime against our country. They really, really, really did. I feel so adamant about that. But we're not on the trans issue. Women have been fearful, and girls have lost out on sporting medals and had to be confronted by men in their toilets, and girls fearful of going to school because there are boys in the changing room trying to take photos of them when they're having their first period. I mean, oh my God, this is so unforgivable. Anybody who didn't stand firm, anybody who wants to be in public life, who didn't stand firm on this and say, no, this is not right, I'm sorry, they need to be hounded from public life. We can't just say, oh, OK, there's a Supreme Court ruling, it's OK now. It's not OK now, because no one normal, no one sane, no one with eyes and ears needed any clarity on this. What we needed was these people to be stopped. Now, here's the thing. Every single NHS hospital in London, probably most NHS trusts in the rest of the country, still allow for men to be put in who claim they're women to be put into women only wards, use women only toilets, women only changing rooms. We've got a couple of cases with an employment tribunal ongoing. We've still got Bridget Phillips, the Education Secretary, also laughably women and equalities minister, again saying this strange combination of words that Keir Starmer has used and others have used that just doesn't really, it says nothing. You say it best when you say nothing at all. And she's saying that there's no issue in schools, and it's like it's all clarified. But there are mixed toilets in schools, whereas schools are supposed to provide single-sex toilets. So does this change today, or doesn't it change today?
And that is the concerning thing, is because of the fact that we all know they've been spineless on this issue. They've realised they've run out of road. They can't hold to these bizarre ideas that they were holding to even 5 minutes ago. The problem is, because it's so entrenched in the bureaucracy in various institutions, it really takes a kind of concerted effort to get rid of that. I mean, it seems like the Equality and Human Rights Commission are going to become quite important in that fight. You've got Baroness Faulkner, who's been a very strong voice.
Described as appalling by Government Minister Chris Bryant.
It's incredible.
In a WhatsApp group. Just
for once again wanting to clarify that sex-based rights are important, and you can't have sex-based rights if you don't believe that biological sex is real. Not a particularly controversial position to hold. So the question is, when you've got a government which clearly are just wanting to become, just kind of quietly back away from the crime scene where this is concerned, that's insufficient to deal with the problem, to really get it out of your institutions and to correct all of the wrongs of the party.
I don't think they're going to be... Everyone's going to have their backside sewed off them for this, because the Supreme Court ruling is very, very clear. What did you make of the protests at the weekend, and apparently plans for more protests around the country? A load of men claiming to be women, holding up signs in Westminster, defacing statues, including Nelson Mandela and of leading suffragists. Bring back witch burning with the JK, referring to JK Rowling. Let's go with the word weeing on TERF, so trans exclusionary radical feminists, i.e. women standing up for women's rights. You're just jealous that my appendage, should we say, is bigger than your boyfriend's, and my, I'm going to go breasts, unless I breast, breasts, are bigger than yours. I mean, also, a misplaced apostrophe, which is the most unforgivable thing.
Absolutely.
Unforgivable. I can deal with any violent threats on a placard, but a misplaced apostrophe, for me, hanging offence. The only good TERF, i.e. a women's rights activist, is as a dead TERF, basically. It's a picture of a woman hanging from a gallows. I mean, that happened in broad daylight outside our parliament. There were plenty of police there. I mean, they're now saying, we're now appealing for action from the police. And Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, who's been solid on this all the time, standing up on this issue. I mean, as many people are pointing out, if people had stood there with those sort of comments about migrants or Muslims or anybody else, that or even about trans people. You take it the other way around. If a load of women had stood there with those sort of signs about trans people, they would have been arrested on the spot. They'd probably summary execution. They'd be behind bars already. I mean, people got sent to jail for a Facebook posting. Someone standing there basically saying they basically want to kill or abuse women. Not a problem from the police, apparently. That's quite telling, isn't it?
It's incredibly telling. And it's also telling of where this movement, this trans activist movement, is and always has been. I mean, I've seen a lot of these demonstrations over the years, also seen a lot of gender-critical demonstrations. Never once on the gender-critical side are you seeing placards talking about hanging trans people or anything as despicable as that. Yet this sort of stuff is always there. Not only that, you then have mainstream politicians or union leaders, people like Joe Grady from the Universities Union, tweeting photos of the crowd, including some of these placards, and talking about this as a great moment for unity. You also see people like Maggie Chapman, the Green MSP in Scotland, attending some rallies at which you've got men, again, kind of voicing the most horrendous misogynistic rhetoric and then refusing to even just leave that demonstration, even to condemn it around the edges. There has been a toleration of this misogyny, I think, because it's inherent to the movement, because the movement is about taking women's rights away. And therefore you can't be
entering
surprised.
women's safe spaces. Why do you want to be in a women's toilet or a women's changing room? Why is that? So again, you know, guys, you're not women. You just hate women. That's let's be honest about it. Look, there's so much more I want to talk about. Coming up, we are going to be talking to the Tablet's Rome correspondent about the plans for the Pope's funeral and his legacy. I just want to talk to you about the legacy of Nigel Farage. We are just a week or so away from those local elections and the Runcorn by-election, as well, the first by-election test, really, of the Labour government. And the polling is extraordinary, and there's particularly some polling from More in Common over the weekend suggesting that most voters think that, you know, Nigel Farage is just as likely as Keir Starmer to be the next Prime Minister after the next general election, but also showing that they could under the current polling, extrapolated, with a big poll, I think 16,000 people, that Nigel Farage could actually be leading the largest party after the next election, if not a majority, but the largest party. Massive losses for Labour. Tories not doing well, but Reform very much on the rise. I mean, this is an extraordinary journey that the party has been on in just the last year, isn't it?
No, absolutely. And it's also such a rare occurrence that you have essentially a third party, let alone one that, you know, barely existed that long ago, actually getting to the point where they could make a serious electoral breakthrough.
We've always been told that wouldn't happen under first past the post.
No, absolutely. And there's still a lot of hurdles to it. I mean, because of the fact that even that More in Common polling, the MRP mega poll that they did over the weekend showing Reform as the potentially largest party, a lot of those seats are on a knife edge. It's the sort of thing where a tiny kind of swing in either direction could really change things. So if you're in the Reform camp, you're certainly not going to want to be declaring victory too early. But this is a very rare thing in British politics because of first past the post, because we have had a very entrenched party duopoly for a long time. Voters are furious. They're up for grabs in a way that they haven't been for many, many decades.
But I think,
nothing is off the table.
I think it's a really good thing. I think people being sort of completely allied to one party, no matter what, I think it actually isn't good for democracy. It's much better if, like, right, this is what we want. Who's going to deliver it to us? And again, the idea that populism in some ways is a bad thing. What, being popular? And that's when that's going to, you know, but they will do what the people want.
Yeah,
I know,
exactly.
mad idea, as opposed to we know better than you. There is so much more to talk about. We're going to talk about breakfast clubs. We are going to be talking more about those crime league tables for migrants awaiting deportation. We're finally going to get those stats. Going to also talk about Gary Lineker's whinging again. Oh, the BBC wanted me to go. I'll get my little violin out before we do that. Also going to be talking about this hilarious wheel of privilege from an NHS trust. We're going to find out where I sit and where Tom sits and where you sit. I'd love to hear from you. Particularly want to hear from you, though, about Keir Starmer finally speaking out on last week's Supreme Court landmark gender ruling, saying he welcomes, he says, the much-needed clarity for women. I want to know what your reaction is to that. Love to hear from you also on those trans protests spreading across the country and the police reaction. More two-tiered justice, folks, two-tiered justice. But also, what do you reckon on Nigel Farage's chances of being the next PM? So much to talk about, plenty more coming up. Do get in touch. Give us a call on 0344 499 1000. You can text on 87222. You can get in touch on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1, standard network rate message. Up next, we are going to talk to the Tablet's Rome correspondent about those plans for Pope Francis's funeral at the weekend, but also going to be talking about his legacy and what happens next. That's all coming up here on Talk.
Basically what has to happen is that the signs male and female now mean in law male and female. As Kishore Faulkner has said in her radio interview, if you put up a sign that says female, that means it's only for female. If you allow in even one man, any special man, any man who identifies as a woman, it's become a mixed sex space. And in law you can't treat female-only spaces as if they're mixed sex. They're two different things. So the people who say, oh, well, you know, you can still set your own policy, well, you can, but then we'll challenge you in court and we'll win. That's what the judgment means.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very good morning. Welcome back to the show. 10:24 is the time. Tom Slater's still with me. We're joined right now by the Tablet's Rome correspondent, Robert Mickens. Very, very good morning to you.
Good to be with you, Julie. I just want to say I'm a former Tablet correspondent. I'm actually with the Union of Catholic Asian News, otherwise known as UCA News, after a year-long sabbatical. So I'll be
thank you for clarifying
writing
that.
again this week.
I very much appreciate that. Right, I do want to ask you, obviously, about, the Cardinals have gathered in Rome today and have already set the date and the time for the Pope Francis's funeral. It will be this Saturday, 9 o'clock UK time. Can you just talk to us a little bit about his legacy? I mean, he was an 88-year-old man. He'd been Pope for quite some time, and not as long as Pope John Paul II, who's very much, I think, for my generation, the Pope we all knew about. What is his legacy?
Well, I think it's hard to sum up in a few words, but one of the things that always impressed me about Pope Francis was, and this might sound kind of strange or corny, but he was so comfortable in his own skin. And I think that was something that made a deep impression on a lot of people, although they might not express it in those words. I think people just saw him as a genuine person, that he wasn't worried too much about playing the role of the Pope. He wasn't really interested in a lot of the protocols. I think sometimes when someone becomes a Pope, take, for example, Benedict XVI, who is really a theology professor at heart. I think when he became Pope, he felt the weight of that office and felt he must do certain things according to the longstanding customs and protocols. Francis, from the very beginning, he just acted like he was getting another job.
He seemed
from one diocese to another.
Yeah, he seemed to not be that particularly interested in the pomp and the circumstance. It seemed to be
even more than that, I think he just felt like, okay, this is a new job that I have. I was a bishop in Buenos Aires, and now I'm the Bishop of Rome. I mean, he even used the same vestments and his mitre, and it drove the people in the ceremonial office in the Vatican kind of crazy, because he didn't want to wear, right from the very beginning, he didn't want to dress up in the red shoulder cape that popes usually wear when they come out and address the crowds. And he said, no, I just put on the stole before I give the blessing. And as soon as he gave the blessing, he took the stole off. And I think that kind of was a signal right there that this is going to be different.
Okay. And in terms of the things he talked about a lot, now, he did seem to me, he was a fairly woke Pope, certainly in his words. The question is whether he was in reality. He talked about, gay rights. He was very much, talking about the rights of people in Gaza. He talked about climate change. He criticised politicians for their policies, including Americans, on refugees and things like that. He was quite sort of very much a woke, almost quite a political Pope. But did he actually do anything? Because he was supposed to be very much representing the poor. He's an Argentinian Pope, son of Italian migrants, and it was all about, helping the poor. In terms of actually tackling some of the big issues, I mean, in terms of poverty in many major Catholic countries, 1.4 billion Catholics around the world, many of them living in rather poor states, in rather poor conditions themselves. Did he, as the leader of the Catholic Church for all that time, do anything to try and help those people, or was it all talk?
I think to understand Pope Francis, you have to understand his way of looking at the world. I would say that probably more than any other Pope that we've seen in our lifetime, certainly in the modern era perhaps, he was a radically evangelical Pope. And I don't mean that like evangelical Christians, but someone like St. Francis of Assisi, whose name he took for his papal moniker, he was somebody who was much more rooted in reading the signs of the times, or what was happening in the world through the lens of the gospel. As Jesus, the saying, what would Jesus do? Francis, for example, you brought up the issue of climate change. He didn't look at climate change like Greta Thunberg, maybe. He looked at climate change, or the earth, as part of God's creation. And his take on protecting what he called our common home was, this is God's creation. And not only the birds, not only the trees or the rivers and the forests, but also the human person. So it was really an A to Z kind of complete view of human life as the creation. And that goes to his radical adherence to the gospel. I mean, I would just say, for example, former previous popes were quoting a lot of their predecessors. Francis rarely did that. He quoted the gospel. I mean, you might think it's strange to say he was a real Christian. well, of course, he's the Pope. But
hey, we've had archbishops who don't believe in the afterlife, I think. So, I know, there we are. Can I just ask you in terms of the legacy now, though, because an awful lot of the cardinals who are going to be making the decision about who the next Pope is are people who are, sorry, people. They're men, as well as they're men who've been appointed. Okay. The only time we're not woke, of course, the Catholic Church, and indeed most churches, most religions. But they've been appointed by this man, and many of them from African nations and sort of the global South, as it's known. That comes with its own problems, doesn't it? Because we know one of the biggest battles, and we've certainly had the Church of England, and I think the Catholic Church as well, is this battle between sort of movement to sort of be a bit more modern in the Western nations and the Northern nations, but actually some very, shall we say, traditional Catholic views regarding women, gay people, many other issues among many of those other cardinals from perhaps less sort of modernised nations. That's going to be an issue in terms of who gets selected as the next Pope, isn't it?
Well, I think what the next conclave is going to be is a referendum on Pope Francis's 12-year pontificate. And I would just point out, I mean, I would caution about, more like 80% or more of these men were actually made cardinals by Pope Francis. And the assumption is, of course, that he stacked the deck and that we're going to get somebody that's a kind of a replica of Pope Francis. I would just caution against that because this is a dispersed group of men. Not all of them share the Pope's priorities. I mean, there are some pretty clerical cardinals in this group of 135 electors named by Pope Francis. And Pope Francis, as you well know, railed against clericalism. It's anybody's guess why he picked some of these men. I mean, you got a cardinal who's an Italian missionary from Mongolia, of all places. I mean, they have like 10 Catholics there. And there's a cardinal in Tonga. I mean, maybe 12 Catholics there. Yeah. I'm exaggerating, of course. Yeah. But the point is, the point is that these are people that we don't really know an awful lot about. And the bigger issue is they don't know an awful lot about each other because Francis never brought them all together as a body. So the next, 10 to 15 days, 15 to 20 days, they've got to kind of get to know each other. They're already arriving in Rome as we speak. They're trickling in. And this morning at 9 a.m., they already began what we call the general congregations. That is, meetings of all the cardinals, even the ones over the age of 80 who cannot participate in the conclave. What they're doing is they're meeting and they're talking about the state of the church. So they're going to get some reports from financial institutions inside the Vatican to get a snapshot of what is the situation of the church right now. Yep. They'll get some global statistics. And while they're doing that, they'll also be talking about what has to happen as the church goes forward. What should our priorities be? And what should the type of pope that we need.
And also often it's age, isn't it? They don't want someone who's too elderly, won't last very long, but also not someone too young who's going to be there 30 years. Just finally, and I feel terrible saying briefly, but we are almost out of time. One of the biggest issues that most people who are not, like me, members of the Catholic Church, know about the Catholic Church in the last few decades has been the issue of the legacy of child abuse and the cover-up of child abuse on a mass scale by senior figures in the Church. It certainly dogged, the previous Pope an awful lot. This Pope talked the talk on this. Many of the victims of paedophile priests say actually he didn't walk the walk, he didn't take enough action, and he, like many, and we've seen it in the Church of England, we've seen it in many organisations around the world, actually simply just sort of move people along, cover it up, try and move on from it. Do you think that's a legacy that now cannot be ignored anymore?
Well, I would preface this by saying that Pope Francis was not perfect, and as none of us are. And I've been a critic of someone who's, I'm like a Pope critic. There are art critics and music critics. That doesn't mean they don't like art or music, but it does mean that they have to look at their subject matter with some objectivity. And I've been one of the critics of Pope Francis on a few issues like women. He's talked a good talk, and usually he's walked the talk. Well, on the issue of women, I think his baggage as a man from Latin America, who's an elderly man from Latin America and a priest, I think that he just could not get around that on this issue. Similarly, with the abuse issue, the one positive thing that Pope Francis has done is he set down some very strong protocols. I think it will be up to his successor and the men and women that successor surrounds himself with to implement more stringently those protocols.
Robert Mickens, so appreciate you joining us, former Rome correspondent at the Tablet. Thank you very much, Dee, for that. I must ask you, Tom Slater, listening to all of that, first thing I'm terrible, being the terrible human being that I am. Yesterday, when I'd heard the news and saw the news about Pope Francis, just remembered that David Lammy tweet, which he put out long before he was Foreign Secretary, backbench, but still a Labour MP. And there was news back in 2013 about, obviously, who was going to become the next Pope. Live video from the BBC News tweet. Chimney of Sistine Chapel as conclave votes for a Pope. Will smoke be black or white? And David Lammy, then a Labour MP, now our Foreign Secretary, wrote, this tweet from the BBC is crass and unnecessary. Do we really need silly innuendo about the race of the next Pope? I mean, A, jumping to race. B, the fact that you didn't know. I mean, I would have known at the age of even 18, that you did the black or white smoke. That was something that was known, wasn't it? And you'd expect a Labour MP to know that. I mean, genuinely scary.
No, absolutely. And especially given the fact that in his current position, it's important that you understand how institutions like the Catholic Church work. It's not an unimportant institution. It represents 1.4 billion people across the world. It has a tremendous amount of kind of geopolitical significance as a consequence of that. Hence why you have many of these scandals with some of the positions and some of the statements that Pope Francis made, whether it was on Gaza or Ukraine or other kind of conflicts. So another example of how, when it comes to actually being a kind of grown-up government, a grown-up country, this Labour administration really struggles with some of the basics.
One of the things I find strange, and again, I feel the same way about royal family as well, or anybody. If you want to make political commentary, as this Pope did, and I mean, I remember I grew up, Pope John Paul II, absolutely plays a crucial role in sort of finding support in Poland, the downfall of communism. I mean, really, really important role. And I say this as someone who's, full-on, fundamentalist atheist, for goodness sake. But if you want to make comments about, Gaza, about refugees, about climate change, about we're allowed to hold you to task and take you to task about it and question it. The Pope is now a political figure, whether you like it or not. And I do think people should talk. I understand people who are grieving, who are Catholics. I completely understand that. But we're talking about the death of a significant world political figure, and we need to talk about that in a sensible way, rather than just sort of people sort of let's all wear black and talk about somebody as if they were. They didn't have that significance. If you're going to have that impact and that significance, you need to be held to account. We need to question it. We need to be able to criticise and condemn or condone.
And also it has so much bearing, doesn't it, on the decision that is now taken in terms of his successor, because of the fact that he does leave a church much more divided than it was previously, precisely because questions of climate, questions of geopolitics, questions of migration have been brought into that sphere in a way that it wasn't previously, and there's therefore upset particularly a lot of the clergy in places like Africa who take a very different view. So that is going to have
horrible, nasty, backward views.
That's something that's something that will naturally come up. This isn't. It's not, as you say, something which is irrelevant to the conversation.
No, exactly. Well, anyway, we'll be talking more about that. Coming up next, we are going to be talking to Bev Jackson. She's the co-founder of LGBT Alliance, about those outrageous protests we saw in Westminster, and why did the police not move in, or is it okay to say kill women, which is basically what those protesters said. We'll talk to you on the phone lines as well. 0344 499 1000. This is Talk.
UK. On DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. Well, let's get to someone who's always talked common sense and certainly didn't need the clarity which the Prime Minister has finally, after 6 days, welcomed when it came to that Supreme Court ruling on what is a woman. Let's talk to Bev Jackson, who's co-founder of the LGB Alliance. That's an organisation set up to represent the views of lesbian, gay and bisexual people. A very good morning to you, Bev.
Good morning, Julia.
Thank you so much for joining us and for all your amazing work on behalf of women and, well, you know, sensible people everywhere over recent years. Keir Starmer was finally forced to make a comment today. He was at a visit to a school in the southwest, that lucky school. Imagine it's bad enough. Go back to school after Easter. It's another thing having the PM turn up and witcher at you. But he said he's really pleased that the Supreme Court has ruled on gender identity. He says it gives much needed clarity for women and service providers. And he says it's a much clearer position. I'm really pleased the court has now clarified the position. And we can move on from there. And I think that's been very helpful, and I would welcome that. I mean, how to say it's about 4 or 5 paragraphs of this, the exact same thing again. He welcomes it. It brings us clarity. 6 days it took him to say that. Do you think he does welcome it? And does it bring us clarity?
Well, thank you for asking that, Julia. I was just looking at the other government reactions. I'm pleased that Yvette Cooper, for instance, condemned the vandalism that we saw at the weekend, but it would have been even better if she condemned the violent threats to women that we saw, which Kemi Badenoch has called criminal incitement. We saw somebody with a placard saying the only good turf is a dead turf, and a union leader with a photo of that. I was very pleased to hear Bridget Phillipson this morning, who really was very clear in welcoming the ruling and saying that guidance will be forthcoming, and I hope it is forthcoming as soon as possible to make the situation clear for service providers. And saying that when she was asked that the entire government has the same view of this, which was important because there was a bit of a wobble about that.
But they don't have the same view of this. We know that Angela Eagle, who's a government minister, we know that Chris Bryant, again, both another government minister, both gay ministers, a private WhatsApp group in which they've actually, you know, basically said they thought the ruling, they thought the Baroness Faulkner of the Equality and Human Rights Commission talking about the clarity and men can't use women's spaces, they thought it was appalling.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's very helpful that WhatsApp exchange was leaked. And I took Bridget Phillipson's words this morning to mean that there'd been some sort of stern talking to for those people, and I really hope that is the case. And obviously, as you say, Keir Starmer finally speaking out a little grudgingly, it seems to me, 6 days later. Can you imagine if he had spoken out? We knew this judgment was coming. We could assume that it might be go this way because this is the only coherent explanation of the law. Can you imagine if he had spoken out on the day of the ruling last week in a statesmanlike address to the nation, explaining that this was necessary and that this is the law and that all the Supreme Court had done was clarify the law? And why was this necessary? It shouldn't have been necessary.
Well, exactly. But that's the thing. Everyone, you know, talking about it, you know, these WhatsApp groups, like it didn't change the law, it clarified the law. But this is what everyone thought the law was until a few years ago. And people like Keir Starmer, he's not part of the solution. He's part of the problem. He was one of the people who said, that trans women were women, and he went along with all this until it was a bit less fashionable. The voters didn't like it, and so now he's sort of vaguely backtracking. But reading the exact words that he said, again, I don't think he is completely backtracking. And even I'm listening to the same interviews. Bridget Phillipson, she's Education Secretary, talking about breakfast clubs, but also she's Women's and Equalities Minister. She is someone who only a while ago was talking about how, you know, trans women, i.e. trans-identified men, should use the women's toilet.
Yeah, I know, but I think that we really have to focus on where we are now and not get too hung up on the fact that people are saying we've always said this when we know they haven't. I mean,
we've always been at war with Oceania. I mean, it is Orwellian, isn't it?
Exactly. That's where we are. But what's more important is how we defuse this public unrest, and that is really important. And we have to look to the source. We see that Stonewall has been going around the country, is in institutions, public and private sector institutions all around the country, and they have been paying Stonewall money for their diversity champion scheme, money to be given what has been referred to in the University of Essex report as incorrect and potentially illegal advice. They have been paying for incorrect and potentially illegal advice. So I really think that Stonewall needs to step up now, take responsibility for the incorrect and potentially illegal advice it has been given, which has been cited in many, many other cases around the country, and write to all its present and past diversity champion scheme members and say, we will be providing free training to now give guidance to you, which is based on the law.
On the actual law has been clarified. I would rather Stonewall just shut up shop, because I think Stonewall did, and I'm sure you'll agree, very big. I think you played a big role, in terms of winning rights for gay people, which they did not have, along with straight people. A fantastic job. And then decided to go on this trans bandwagon. Now, this is a question I wanted to put to a guest of mine last week, Shivani Dave, before she decided to leave the studio. But this is the thing I've always been very confused.
Quite dramatic, wasn't it?
Yes, well, wasn't it dramatic? That's the word. I mean, I don't know why asking people questions makes them unsafe, but there we are. But I'm always fascinated. What are the rights? We're talking about trans rights, the human rights, and it's a really important movement. What are the rights that trans people have that other people don't have, that other people do have?
I think Trevor Phillips answered that question very eloquently in his interview last week. There's no such thing as trans rights. There are people who call themselves, who refer to themselves as transgender, do have protection, and they should have protection from discrimination under the protected characteristic of gender reassignment. That is the same now as it was last week, as it was in 2010. They have always had those protections. That is right that they should have them. And I want to say some people who identify as transgender, and I'm not talking about the men who call themselves lesbians, but some are definitely vulnerable people, vulnerable young people who have been confused, and they need all the help and support that we can give them. And they still have all the protections that they had before.
And I think that was where most of us were, in terms of being kind and respectful and empathetic, and as we all should be. But again, those are very different from the people, the men largely, standing around at Westminster yesterday, hurling abuse at women, calling for the death of prominent women's campaigners. And the police not stepping in. As you say, Kemi Badenoch did actually, speak out on this. But well done, Yvette Cooper, getting worried about statues, being defaced.
Exactly.
Can you imagine any other group in society if it was women's rights activists who were saying, trans people, no good trans person other than a dead trans person, or kill all trans activists, women would have been arrested on the spot. Why do you think that these trans activists were not taken by the police immediately?
Well, I'm afraid it's unfortunate, isn't it? That, I mean, this word toxicity that's always used about the debate is a completely disingenuous word. It is toxic because these gender identity activists, as I call them, have threats. They make threats to women. Why do they make threats to women? Because this is a misogynistic movement. I'm afraid that is the only answer to that question. And yes, you will never find women's rights or LGBT rights activists calling for anyone's death. It's except for a few lunatics. I'm sure there are lunatics everywhere. But in general, we are a very peaceful movement who have simply been saying, this is the law. This is the coherent view of the law. This is the law as it is. Would you please stop giving people disinformation? And all those people who have paid for disinformation, they should ask for their money back, because it has caused them a lot of grief and a lot of money.
Absolutely. And I tell you what, if you're going into hospital, you're working in hospital or at a school, your kid's gone back to school after Easter today, if there are not single-sex toilets, single-sex changing rooms and the like, speak up, get in touch. Lots of organisations will act for you. That is a clear win. Any lawyer will take that on. No win, no fee, because it's a guaranteed win. We're going to stop this. End of. Bev Jackson, co-founder of the LGBT Alliance, thank you. 10:49 is the time. Up next, we're going to talk about the NHS Wheel of Privilege. Where are you on the Wheel of Privilege? This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
to reports from his doctors, had suggested that his convalescence was going well. But on the other hand, his immune system was extremely depressed by what had happened. And he had, I understand, been warned by his doctors that if he mixed with people, he was in serious danger of catching an infection that could end his days.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Thank you very much indeed for joining me. 10:52 is the time. Let's get straight to my next guest, James Esses. He's a psychotherapist, and founder of Just Therapy, and he joins us right now. A very good morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Thank you very much for joining us. I just got to get your brief reactions. I know the trans issue is something you have campaigned on so much in terms of protecting children in particular, and I haven't had a chance to speak to you since that Supreme Court ruling. Just in terms of, very briefly, Keir Starmer's response today saying he welcomes the clarity. What do you say to that?
Oh, it's fantastic, isn't it? Our KC Prime Minister waited for a Supreme Court judgment to teach him something that kindergarten students should know. I mean, it's absolutely pathetic. We never, in truth, we never needed the Supreme Court judgment. No. Tell us something we knew all along. You know, I'm glad to finally see him say it, but, you know, he goes whichever way the wind's blowing.
Doesn't he just? Look, I want to talk to you specifically, though, about something. We've got the image, which we can show everybody, which is an NHS trust that has created, this is just hilarious, a wheel of privilege. And it's so that that this is at Kingsmill Hospital in Sutton, Ashfield. It's so that people who work there, as part of an allyship training module, and it can basically show staff how they can work out whether they are lucky or whether they are marginalised. Now, I don't know if we can put it up. We don't have the image. I can hold up a version of the image if you're watching on YouTube or on your connected device. And it's a wonderfully beautiful design, very beautiful design. And at the outside, it's got marginalised, and in the centre, it's got power. And basically, you get to answer questions on your citizenship, your skin colour, your education, your ability, your sexuality, your neurodiversity, mental health, body size, housing, wealth, language, gender. I mean, you name it. It's going on the board. I was wondering where you come, because I do pretty darn well on this one, because white to dark, I'm white, I've got higher education, I'm able-bodied, heterosexual, neurotypical. My husband might disagree, but I'm robust mental health. I'm between average and slim on the body size. I'm a property owner. I'm comfortable in terms of income. I speak English, and naturally, I'm a cisgender woman. That's the only way I go down, but I'm a citizen of the country. So the only one where I'm not in the very middle, pretty much, is that I'm a woman, not a man. I'm wondering, are you more powerful than me?
Oh, Julia, on the back of this, I mean, I'm akin to a demigod. That I wield.
I worship. I think Tom Slater's in the studio, I think, as well. You come up, yeah?
No, yeah, I feel incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I'm surrounded by all these wonderful, powerful, quote, cisgender men. We used to just call them men. But, James, what do you make of this?
I mean, look, from a therapeutic perspective, this is really quite concerning, because it's splitting people off into either eternal victims, which is extremely addictive, actually, because it gives you an excuse for why things are not going the way they should in life, because now somebody who's not succeeding can simply point to this wheel and say, well, that's the reason. So that's not a good thing. Equally, for the other cohort, it's essentially publicly shaming them. Yeah. It's completely anti-therapeutic, which should fly in the face of NHS policies, you know, and it suggests that we can learn all about somebody and know everything about them based on these immutable characteristics. And crucially, it lacks any form of nuance whatsoever. So, for example, supposedly, according to this, somebody who is slim is powerful. Yeah. Ask somebody with anorexia how powerful. they feel? Or what about somebody who is undocumented? Now, it's interesting with this word that's used, because I would refer to undocumented as illegal.
Yes.
Here, they are given the victim card, but they are marginalised in some way by having committed an offence. I've seen other wheels similar to this, where it says, for example, that people who are European are privileged over non-Europeans. Well, again, ask the Ukrainians how privileged they feel present. The list goes on and on and on. Worst of all is the fact that it suggests once again that if you're a straight white man, you are the epitome of privilege. We know that it's white working class boys that are struggling the most in society.
Absolutely. But that's the thing I was wondering with this. The wheel was shared by Sherwood Forest Hospitals NHS Foundation Trust. They said they spent no money developing the resource, obviously. They said it was available online. It said the wheel was handed out to help allyship training participants to better understand privilege. And again, this is all part of that DEI, diversity, equality, inclusion, claptrap, which has nothing to do with basically people just treating people as equals and not being discriminatory, which is what we all just thought we were doing beforehand. This is about, isn't it? It's the oppressor and the oppressed. And it's basically about separating people and saying you're different from people because of all of these different factors. It doesn't help anyone, either the people who are supposedly marginalised or the people in power.
No, it's complete and utter black and white thinking. It pits groups of societies against each other. It's anti-therapeutic. I mean, we know in life generally that comparing ourselves constantly to others, it's a zero-sum game. Yeah. We can always find people who are better off, worse off. Our NHS should not be promoting this stuff. And, by the signs of it, many of our doctors don't seem to know what makes a man and what makes a woman. And I would suggest that NHS funding is providing training on that basic biology rather than this woke DEI.
I'd rather we just provided them training in saving lives and making people healthier. I just don't know why they're spending time on anything else, but there we are. Yeah, which changing room to use would be good. James Esses, psychotherapist and founder of Just Therapy, thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater, I mean, genuinely, I'm pretty sure you and Mr. Esses both trump me on the power thing because I've made the mistake of being born a woman. What a mess that's turned out to be.
Let's put a spring in my step this morning to find out that I hold even more privilege than I was hitherto aware of. You just think also, like, imagine being kind of, you feel for the kind of just duty nurses or whoever it is who has to be sat in front of this, being explained in excruciating detail these sixth formerish opinions. You think, why was this ever tolerated?
Well, but it's going to continue to be tolerated again. And why is the NHS, like all these other organisations, and schools are doing this, and loads of, I mean, pretty much a lot of private companies are doing it too, spending time on this nonsense. I mean, again, if you're in a private company, are you doing things to improve, make the company sell more goods or services and make money? Or if you're in the public sector, are you providing more services for people? In the healthcare service, even more so, are you saving lives? Any time spent on any of this nonsense is time taken away from the stuff that really matters.
No, absolutely, and it's such low-grade stuff as well. This is the sort of thing that, your average 15-year-old could pick up from half an hour on TikTok.
They do a better wheel than this. No. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you on the wheel of privilege? I want to know from you. Call in, give us your details, and I'll tell you where you are on the wheel of privilege, whether you are above or below Tom Slater, who seems to have topped the list here. I'd love to hear from you also on the trans issues, on everything else we're talking about today. Take the news up next. This is Talk.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week, the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humsley Useless is now spending his time.
There goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar.
Hello,
and
lady.
Unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the Week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
Hi, I'm...
Across the UK. On DAB+. On your smart speaker. On your smart TV. And on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good morning. Welcome back to the show. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. This is Talk, the home of common sense. And whether you're listening on DAB+ radio or on your smart speaker, watching on YouTube or your connected device, it is great to have your company. I hope you had a lovely, lovely Easter. We're getting the nice Easter weather today. Obs, that's what we do in this country. But obviously a lot of you back at work after the kids have gone back to school. Yay. Working from home. Wink, wink. Yeah, at least you get to listen to us. Anyway, great to have your company. I'm still delighted to say the editor of Spiked Online, Tom Slater, is with us as well. Morning once again to you. Lots more to talk about in the show, lots more to get in. We promised we're going to get to your calls. We wanted to get in, obviously, a guest on Pope Francis's death and the funeral arrangements and the legacy. So we will get to more of your calls in this hour. I do promise you. Do get in touch. In particular, I want to hear from you about Keir Starmer finally breaking his silence on last week's Supreme Court landmark gender ruling. He said he welcomes the much-needed clarity for women. But, you know, what's your reaction to that? Because isn't the problem with that we only needed clarity because people like him were lying to us about what is a woman, what is a man all this time. Apparently he's discovered that apparently we're adult human females. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word TALK in your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1. Standard network rate message. Also going to be talking about the nationalities of migrants awaiting deportation. And with the highest rates of crime, they will now be revealed in official league tables to be published by the government for the first time later this year. About time too. We know what those stats are going to say because these stats have been published across Europe, and we now know which countries from we're getting perhaps the biggest problems with. Also, Donald Trump, who promised to end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of taking office, said he now hopes for a peace deal this week, as Vladimir Putin ended his pretend Easter truce yesterday by resuming his aerial bombardment of Ukraine. All of that coming up, plenty more besides. Breakfast clubs as well I want to talk to you about as well, Tom, but lots to go on in terms of what's going on at home and abroad. Let's just start with Pope Francis' death, announced yesterday on Easter Monday, after his first appearance in public after a very long time, very long illness. It's been revealed that he didn't die of pneumonia as many suspected. 88-year-old man, very, very unwell for a very long time. I'm quite surprised by how many people were surprised that he did die yesterday morning. In terms of, we've got the funeral is going to be on Saturday. The cardinals were already meeting in Rome to decide, all the funeral arrangements, and then of course they're going to have a few weeks to decide who the next pope is going to be. In terms of the legacy of Pope Francis, someone who has been very political, as many popes have been in recent decades. I'm thinking Pope John Paul II, crucial role in terms of, as a Polish pope himself, criticising the communist regime. But in terms of his woke politics, he spoke out. On every woke issue, whether it was refugees, whether it was Gaza, whether it was climate change, gay, LGBT rights, and the like. But at the end of the day, and you spoke about poverty, and you're supposed to be this very sort of, the representation of the poor. But did he do anything to actually further any of those causes? Did he tackle, for instance, the big issue that's been afflicting the church for decades now, the issue of the paedophile priests and tackling that sexual abuse legacy?
Well, I think his legacy is clearly just a more divided Catholic Church. I mean, as you say, the various kind of political causes, that he's involved himself in over the years are very controversial, whether it's climate, whether it's the question of gay people within the church and what that means, what kind of posture should be taken towards them, whether it's various geopolitical issues. He was quite outspoken on Gaza, he was quite outspoken on Ukraine, and in ways that, again, large swathes of the Catholic Church would potentially disagree with. At the same time, it's not as if he pleased the more reformist or even the kind of more progressive voices even outside of the church, because at the end of the day, the Pope is still Catholic. He's not going to embrace homosexuality. He's not going to embrace women priests, for instance. So it's one of those things where he leaves a divided church, but also not having achieved much from what people
and
might
you
hope
say
he would.
massive
at the
big
same time.
divisions between this, what's called the globe, the Western nations and the global South, as people say. Poorer countries with very much non-Western values. You know, it's one of my battles I keep having with people all the time. When people about universal human rights and values. No such thing. These don't exist at all. They are basically an entire creation of Western liberal democracy. The views on women's rights, gay rights, anything else, these are entirely Western creations. They do not exist in large parts of the world. And the Catholic Church actually spans both very modern liberal states and also, so I'm sorry, let's use the term, backward countries that still think, homosexuality should be illegal and women are basically the property of their men. I'm sorry, call me old-fashioned for thinking that's backward, but I do. But one of the things I do almost admire the Catholic Church for, as someone who has no religious beliefs whatsoever, is at least they're kind of, and to a certain extent, standing firm against sort of modernity in some ways, as much as I'm appalled by the fact that, the male pope will be chosen by an entirely large group of men. There are no women involved. But if that's what your church teachings tell you, then fill your boots. I don't care. It's got nothing to do with me. I don't get involved in. As long as people aren't breaking the law and allowing the abuse of children, and that's happening across the board in every church and in non-church organisations, it's nothing to do with me. But we've seen the Church of England try and modernise itself, but in the Western nations, but facing the same issues, dealing with African nations, just having none of it.
No, absolutely. And I think the Catholic Church is an institution, whatever one feels about it, whether someone is a believer or not, has been a kind of a stand against the kind of general cultural relativist drift that might exist. You might disagree with its fundamental principles and precepts, but still, under Francis, you start to see at least some of the kind of the mood music change. As I say, fundamentally, it's not as if there was some marked shift in relation to the Church's position on homosexuality, for instance, but the posture was slightly less judgmental than it might have been previously. So it just shows
churches should be judgy, though, shouldn't they?
Well, that's one of the things, isn't it? If you have a kind of
the point of church,
doctrinal
isn't it, to be
view
judgy?
of these things, then clearly an element of judgment comes into it. But at the same time, I think that's why it's such a significant institution, not least because it represents so many people, around 1.5 million, a billion of them, but also because of the fact that it clearly is coming under the same kind of political pressures and stresses and strains that, culturally speaking, that all of our institutions are. It's just
absolutely.
in a very different kind of setting.
Well, and again, I was going to say, talking about men in dresses. Let's go on to another topic. I'm sorry.
You've been holding that one in all morning.
I've been holding that one in, but it's just, again, I completely understand that 1.4 million people will be very much mourning this man's death, and it's 6 million Catholics in this country as well. His funeral's going to be on Saturday, and there was a lot of discussion. But again, I do think it's really important if spiritual leaders, and we've had this with virtually every single recent Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby wasn't the first. Spiritual leaders want to involve themselves in very divisive political topics, which they're entitled to do, then we're entitled to discuss them as effectively political figures rather than as religious figures. I think that is the case, and I think that discussion should be had. Let's talk about the men in dresses who were protesting at the weekend in Westminster. Incredibly horrific. I mean, absolutely horrific posters. The only good TERF, i.e., a woman who campaigns for women's rights. Oh, sorry about that, guys. Is a dead TERF. I'm changing some of the language. I heart weeing on TERFs. Again, women. Bring back witch burning, JK. And you're just jealous that my appendage is bigger than your boyfriend's and my breasts are bigger than yours. That's the sort of message from men who are insisting that they are, in their minds, women and have the same rights as women. Now, we had defacing of statues, including the suffragist statue. We've had some appalling abuse online. I mean, a complete meltdown from the likes of, I'm not even going to name them, give them any dignity, but some of the biggest trans activists online who've been, by the way, abusing people, not just J.K. Rowling, but Maya Forstater, Helen Joyce, everyone else. They don't go for me largely. Other than, you look like a man. I mean, again, well done. But, I mean, it just makes me laugh. It just makes me, you don't look like a woman. What's your point? What's your point? But I always find it fascinating who they go for and who they don't go for. But there's horrific abuse. But I cannot believe a scenario where in broad daylight and photographed on film, that a bunch of women activists for women's rights held up the equivalent signs about trans people, that those women would not currently right now be behind bars. And yet those men are allowed to write that and say that. You've got people like, you've got government ministers like Chris Bryant and Angela Eagle in a private WhatsApp group talking about how the decision of the Supreme Court last week, basically how to undermine it, and criticising the chair of the Human Rights and Equalities Commission as appalling for stating, men are not women and men need to use men's toilets, not women's toilets. I mean, how on earth have we got ourselves into a situation where yet again we've got a completely two-tier justice?
It's absolutely incredible, but it's what we've come to expect. I think this is a real mask-off moment for the trans activist movement.
Well, they do like to keep their masks on.
They do, that's true. But they're very health conscious, as we know. This is something where those of us who've been covering this, who've been following this, will be unsurprised by that outpouring of sort of violent misogyny that we saw on the streets over the weekend. But maybe now it's going to come to more public attention. You would just think that if you're running around Parliament Square or Manchester or wherever it is, holding up placards about hanging women, that's what the only good turf is a dead turf means. If you're going around defacing statues of suffragist trailblazers like Millicent Fawcett, if you're going around publicly urinating because you're so upset you're no longer allowed to use the women's toilets, maybe you're on the wrong side. That was the one thing that I would offer to them this morning as something for reflection. And I think it's demonstrated, as Bev Jackson from the LGB Alliance was saying earlier, it's because this has always been a misogynistic movement. It's
not men who think they're women, it's men who hate women.
That is becoming impossible to deny, and it's something, unfortunately, which has been tolerated by people who should know better, people within the Labour Party. Chris Bryant finds this Supreme Court ruling appalling. Has he said anything about the appalling statements that we saw on our streets?
Well,
Obviously
exactly.
not.
And again, there seems to be more concern for Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, about statues being defaced. But it's interesting, the Prime Minister today, speaking at a visit to a school, I wonder if he checked at the school if they had single-sex toilets for the girls who perhaps don't want to be changing with the boys. And as they
probably don't want Keir Starmer going down their toilets.
No, and they are legal. Well, I don't know. Apparently men think it's OK to hang around women's toilets. We saw some demonstrations the weekend. But he made this statement. He said, I welcome the decision of the Supreme Court, which has given us clarity, much-needed clarity. And I think for those that are now drawing up guidance, it's a much clearer position. I'm really pleased that the court has now clarified the position. We can move on from there. Yeah, well, you want to move on from there, don't you? This is a man who has told us, basically, that you're a bad, evil person if you don't say that trans women are women. He's tried to have his cake and eat it on both sides. It ain't working out very well for him. He's backtracking. I don't believe a word the man says. We didn't need clarity. If he, as Prime Minister or as leader of the opposition for many years, had simply said, very, very simply, look, this is clearly not the case. Trans people don't have the right to trans men to steal women's rights to single-sex spaces. It's quite clear and obvious. We could have had that clarity long before now. I mean, you and I agree, in fact, all of our guests agree, and we discussed it ad nauseum last week. Because, it is absurd that we needed judges to make a decision on this, because we all knew already, apart from, apparently, people like Keir Starmer. But at the end of the day, do you think anything's going to change? Because kids have gone back to school today after the Easter holidays. There are still going to be kids going into school and little girls in primary and in secondary school who are having to share toilets with boys when they've got a right not to. They're supposed to be single-sex, changing rooms. I've got no issue if there's no such thing as a trans kid, no such thing as a non-binary kid, you're a boy or a girl. But if some kids have been horribly just sucked into this world, either on YouTube or by parents trying to be woke at the latest dinner party, which always look at the parents, by the way, look at the parents, is that if they don't feel comfortable in either bathroom, well, you know what? There's a disabled loo, I'm sure, somewhere, or the teacher's loo. You can use that one. That's fine. But you don't get to use the girls' loo because you're not a girl, you're a boy.
It's one of those things where the fight really kind of begins now. The thing that's changed is that parents who have been taking their schools to task over policies like this, organisations which have been pushing very firmly for places to actually uphold their legal obligations, it's now abundantly clear that the law is on their side. That will have an effect.
Start suing, everybody. Lawyer up. Start suing.
And also, that was another thing about this ideology, is it's crept in very quickly. It's taken over a lot of institutions, but in large part because of the concerted effort of certain activists and the ignorance and cowardice of leadership. A lot of those people will turn on a dime once they realise that they can no longer, that the game is up, that this isn't going to be worth their while. So I am slightly more hopeful in the fact that there's still work to be done, but there is still work to be done, you know, I think is the
I'm not as hopeful as you. I'm really not as hopeful for you, but there we are. Bridget Phillipson, who's the Equality and Women's Minister, again, I don't know why, and Women's, you know, it's like as if these are separate things. She was out and about today. What she wanted to talk about was the free breakfast clubs to open at 750 schools. The plan is that is going to be spread out across the whole country. But we've had a lot of that in, you know, I think London's got the free breakfast clubs paid for, by the way. Not free, paid for by the taxpayers. But this is from Tuesday today. Thousands of parents can access half an hour of free morning childcare as part of the trial. It's going to run to July. They're going to have an expected national rollout. But basically they want free breakfast clubs in every English primary school, and funding is now at 30 million. The scheme will give parents of primary age children up to 95 additional hours of care, save them £450 per year in childcare costs. Now, it's been welcomed by Head Teachers Union. Lots of schools already do this already. I don't understand why this shouldn't be, I don't understand why this should be free. I don't understand why the schools should be giving the kids breakfast when parents can afford to pay for breakfast themselves. I don't think there's a single parent in this country who can't afford breakfast. I've spoken to numerous parents on minimum wages, on benefits, single parents. I've got a lot of friends and family who are single parents who never had to struggle putting a piece of toast or a bowl of cereal in front of their kid of a school day. But we know there are kids who go to school without food. We know that. But that's a parenting issue. Should that become a school issue and an issue for everyone else to pay for?
Well, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I think this really comes out of the quite paternalistic nature of the Labour Party now, where it kind of sees as its role to take a even greater interest in the raising of children, even the feeding of children. And I think sometimes it's partly motivated by not trusting parents to feed them the right kinds of things as well, which is often a sort of under.
Well, school meals used to be the most unhealthy meal you'd have.
No, absolutely. I mean, those days were unfortunately over from what I can tell. But it's the sort of thing where if one wanted to make the case for this on the basis of it's basically a form of kind of extra free, not free because people pay for it obviously, but it's an extra form of childcare. There's also some breakfast provision, that would be one thing. But because of the fact that in the context of everything else that's going on economically, you kind of think that's it. Like if you really want to help working people who are really struggling under the costs that they're now having to face under the horrendous economic circumstances we've had since COVID in particular, is this really the focus? Shouldn't you be focused on actually creating an economy in which they could have more gainful employment?
Well, again,
and things like childcare and food prices.
I mean, that's the thing. I mean, look, you know, it is the case now that, you know, 70%, why can't people feed their kids at home? 70% of mums most dads, but 70% of mums of children at primary school do actually work, and many full time, and therefore they really are struggling. And again, you know, you have to be at work much earlier than it would take you to drop your kid off at school at the normal school opening hours and then get to work in terms of your travel time, so it makes it difficult. And I'm all for having some sort of club and schools allowing kids to arrive early and and give parents that little bit of leeway so they can carry on, you know, with the job as well. And again, I think kids having working parents who get up in the morning and go off and do and pay their way is very, very important. We know kids do better in those homes. But I just think we are taking away so much of the duties of parents. I mean, teaching kids how to clean their teeth. Kids are turning up at school now at the age of almost 5 years old, still in nappies. They can't sit upright. They can't hold a pencil. They've never seen a book. They don't know how to follow instructions. They don't know how to take turns. I mean, this is basic parenting. I mean, I'm trying to move away from being quite nanny state in my soul in terms of, but there are good ways and bad ways to raise a child. And anyone who's got a child, who's got friends who've got children and family members will know what works and what doesn't. It's not actually that complicated. There's routine, there's rules, there's discipline. And I don't mean hitting your kid, I mean just expectations of behaviour. There's, you know, it's the food you give them. And no, it doesn't have to be expensive. Vegetables are very cheap, you know, and it's all this stuff. And, you know, bedtime, things like that, you know, and it's just talking to your kids. Put your sodding phone down and read your kid a book. You know, this is basic stuff. And we are taking more and more away. At this point, I think we should just have kids who just go into little pods, we give them an iPad, and then someone else takes care of them, and parents have nothing to do with them. That's the way we're going. And especially where the school is concerned, if you think about so many different areas, they're now kind of involved in teaching kids, you know, like kind of life skills in a way that wasn't previously necessary. Mental health. There's often relationships. A lot of sex and relationship education has been widely expanded, far beyond the kind of birds and the bees and the kind of, you know, necessary bits of information that you might want to impart through to it really becoming a discussion about
something that really should only be between parents and children. And it's the problem is the more you feed this, the more there's an appetite for it, in a sense. The more people turn
Oh, well, I'll
to
let school deal with
the
that.
state to handle it. And it's also just an overload on the education system. I mean, in some of the reports around this Breakfast Club plan, a lot of them saying, is the funding actually going to come through? Are we going to have to start shouldering the cost for it?
Yeah.
Teachers are now have to be social workers. They have to be gender ideology experts. Until about 5 minutes ago, they have to deal with all these things. Meanwhile, there are kids who are struggling to come out of school knowing how to read and write effectively.
Should
so maybe we should focus
things?
on that, would be my modest proposal.
Why don't parents do the parenting and schools do the teaching, and let's see how that works out. And here's a top tip, parents. If you don't want to spend time with your kid and you don't want to actually feed your kid and read to your kid and spend time with your kid and talk to your kid, put them to bed at the right time and all that, maybe don't have a kid. I mean, I don't know, big part of feminism. I mean, one of the most amazing things that ever happened to women was the contraceptive pill, was the ability to control your own fertility. If you don't want a kid, don't have a kid. Once you've had a kid, do the job properly and stop expecting the teachers to do it for you. Oh, and me as a taxpayer to pay for it. Your lesson from Julia today. 11:22 is the time. Up next, going to get to your calls, particularly on Keir Starmer and trans activists, and on anything else in between. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Your thoughts on Breakfast Club's very welcome too. This is Talk.
It's a bit like, you know, ambulance drivers putting fires out, isn't it? It would be the same thing. Stick in your lane, police, and stop meddling with this. We all know, really, what this is about. It's a hangover from COVID. It is a means of exercising power and authority on the part of senior police officers, and indeed, I'm sure, fuelled by government. The government loved it during the riots in the summer, didn't they? That they could impose such things, non-crime hate incidents on people.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense, with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater's still with us as well. Let's get to your calls, 0344 499 1000, in particular on some of this trans activism. It's still in the news, guys. Angie's on the line in Plymouth. Hello, Angie.
Hi, Julia.
Hello.
Fantastic show as always.
Well, thank you so much for waiting. I wanted to speak to you in the last time. I said, get her back on the line. I promise we'd have lots of guests. What do you want to say, my darling?
I love you bits. Yeah, no, what I want to... there's so much I want to say. Firstly, before I get on to what I want to say, is can I just let you know that all our 6 grown-up children were given their breakfast every day before they went to school. I just thought I'd mention that.
Oh, really? I mean, and how did you manage that, Angie?
Oh, I just don't know. It's calling getting out of your arse out of bed in time.
Language.
Being organised.
Apologies for that language.
Oh, sorry, is that wrong? Sorry. Getting your behind out of bed in time and being organised and having clean uniforms for them, taking them to school. And also I used to give them packed lunch, and then they also had to have a cooked meal when they came home. Funny that.
I mean, Angie, you're a saint. But again, used to be normal. But anyway, right. What else do you want to say?
But, the first thing I really wanted to say was that I just found it really actually distressing yesterday to see people threatening death to one of my, obviously as a retired English teacher, J.K. Rowling is one of my heroes anyway, because she did so much for literature and art.
Oh, didn't she? Yeah.
Fantastic woman in so many ways. Death threats being made to her, and the police just stood there doing nothing.
Yep.
I mean, I just did break down actually, and I just found it absolutely disgraceful, and I really, I am a deep down optimist. I do think that actually what's going to happen is that the Labour Party are going to mess things up so badly that everybody's going to come to their senses and turn this country around again. But I really, that was a shocking sight.
I mean, it wasn't even shocking to me because I've seen online they take so little action. Now, again, Tom Slater's here. You're pretty much free speech absolutist, and I'm not quite so much. But no one, even in America with the First Amendment, you're not allowed to make threats of death against people. That's that is a criminal offence. And it seems to me if those messages those slogans were spouted by women activists against trans people or anyone and everyone against migrants, Muslims, gay people, any supposed vulnerable group, 100% the police would have stepped in. I mean, 100%. Their behaviour, their aggression, police would have gone in with batons if it was any other group of people.
No, I totally agree with you. I totally agree. And,
we're just women, so we don't count. We're just horrible, nasty TERFs.
Do you know what really upset me was when, seeing the statues of some of the suffragettes, who just, and bearing in mind some of them died, they were force-fed in prisons, and, they fought for us to get the vote. And I just think, really honestly, can I just tell you one very interesting little story?
Yeah.
It was 2 years ago, my then, one of my beautiful granddaughters, Alice, I took her to the toilet, Sainsbury's toilet, because she needed a toilet. And so I took her in. And when we went in there, it was like, this man walked into the toilet. And I did say, and to be fair, I did say to him, I said, look, I'm very sorry, but I'm not happy having a man in a female toilet with my 3-year-old.
Can I clarify? Was he dressed in what he thought was
he looked like one of the ugly sisters in a pantomime. Yeah, he was all dressed up, makeup, everything.
Yeah.
Alice just sort of like stared at him. She'd never seen anything like it in her life. And, and bearing in mind we're down the southwest, we're a bit behind the times anyway. And so, all these things, we catch up on things that London's doing.
Yeah, come on. There's basically a man dressed as a woman in the girls' toilet, in the women's toilet. What did you do?
So I asked him to leave. And to be fair, I said, look, I'm really sorry. I'm not happy having you in here. This is a female toilet. And to be fair to him, he did leave.
But he only left because you challenged him.
Yeah, because I wasn't happy, having him in the toilet with my 3-year-old.
Good for you. I mean, everyone should always challenge on that. But again, a lot of people get very fearful, and we've seen an awful lot of men posting online about, their excitement. They seem to be getting quite a kick out of being in women's toilets. But there we are. Angie, great call. Such a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed. I know, isn't it amazing though, there, Tom? A woman able to point out whether a man should be in a woman's toilet or not. Didn't need clarity for the Supreme Court years ago. Oh, and able to feed her 6 kids breakfast before they went to school without the state stepping in. Who knew?
Didn't need to inspect any gender recognition certificates. We all know what's going on there. No, it's one of those things where on so many of these issues, it does feel like, whilst you won't want to declare victory too early, but where the gender issue in particular is concerned, common sense is coming back in around the edges.
Oh, it's got to come back into fashion at some point. Let's go to another quick call. Herbie's on the line in Harrow. Herbie, what do you want to say?
Good morning. I can't believe that Sir Keir Starmer is so negative about what as a woman. I mean, say he's married to one, isn't he? Surely he knows what a woman is.
Well, you'd like to think. Well, he again. This is all Orwellian, Stalinist. This never happened. It's never happened. But I don't think his statement suggested that he did. He does really you think what this court says, because he says a woman is an adult female, and the court has made that absolutely clear. But he has also made statements in the last 2 or 3 years about men who think they're women.
But Julie, look, if you want to be a trans person, I've got no issues with that whatsoever. That's what you want to be, fair enough. But you can't change nature, what's produced a man or a woman. You know, we are produced as a man and we're produced as a woman. It's what nature's done to us. We can't change that. We can't alter that. It's as simple as that.
But do you trust when Keir Starmer says he welcomes the clarity? Do you trust him?
No, I do not. I mean, to say you can't. They're trying to change what can't be done. It's not possible. As I said,
do you think Keir Starmer and his lot? Do you think they actually believed what they've been saying in recent years? Trans women are women, all that nonsense.
No.
So why did they say it then?
Because they're scared of what might be the outcome. That's what the problem is.
Who are they? They're scared of the trans activists.
Well, Julie, you're up against factions that are really determined to change the way we are and to what it is. And you're not going to alter that, I'm afraid. They're just demonstrating they've defaced the statute. For what purpose?
Yeah.
As I said, you can't change what Mother Nature's produced.
Herbie didn't need any clarity. Funny that, eh? 11:33 is the time. We'll take a quick break and then we're going to be talking to former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards, see if we can make sense of all that with him. Also talking about the possibility this time of hope for peace in Ukraine this week. It was going to be one day, Donald Trump said before he was elected. But we'll talk to Putin's #1 foreign enemy, and proud to be so, Sir Bill Browder, about that. This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense. 11:35 is the time. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer. Tom Slater's still with me as well. Delighted to be joined now by former Labour Special Advisor Paul Richards. A very good morning, a belated happy Easter to you.
And to you, good morning and happy Easter.
Well, thanks for joining us now. I just want to ask you, first of all, just about Keir Starmer welcoming, he says, and being really pleased with the Supreme Court ruling last week. It took him 6 days. I mean, he was away on holiday. You know me. I'm a big fan of the holiday. He was away on holiday with his family, but certainly not on the day or the day after that result came out and the Supreme Court ruling that women were women and men were men, and men who think they're women can't use women's single-sex facilities. It was very, very clear. And he's been back since, I think, Sunday. He's now finally been asked in public, and he says he welcomes the decision of the Supreme Court. It's given us clarity, much-needed clarity. Do you think he does welcome that decision?
Well, first of all, I think we can forgive him for not instantly going to Twitter or whatever it might be to, share his views over Easter.
The result was out on Wednesday morning.
He was obviously respecting the holiday. And,
No. The result was out on Wednesday morning.
And then I think we have to say what he says at face value too, which is that he welcomes the clarity the Supreme Court has given us. And I think any sensible person would be in the same place. It just the court has spoken, they've deliberated upon it, they've said what they've said, and now we need to move forward.
Should we take also at face value things he said in the last 3 years about it's not actually true to say that only women have a cervix, as one of his former MPs has said, and that. Very, 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 very questionable statements about the percentage of women who have a penis. 99.9% of us don't, apparently. So should we take that at face value too?
Well, he's a lawyer and he's looked at the Supreme Court judgment, and that's what will inform government policy and his.
Well, except that was always the law. But it was always the law, wasn't it? People like people like Keir Starmer who gave us the lack of clarity in the first place.
No, I disagree with that. I mean, the court case was brought by people who did want to dispute it, but the Supreme Court has spoken loud and clear and unanimously what the situation is. And that, as ministers on the media rounds this morning have been making absolutely clear, is what will inform the Labour government going forward.
But is it completely good? What about the likes of, there's a WhatsApp group that was LGBT plus or whatever, how many letters we're adding on, and after that group within government, Chris Bryant, a prominent gay Labour minister, Angela Eagle, again another prominent gay Labour minister, both agreeing that this was, that they weren't happy about the ruling. How would they, organise against it? And even saying that the chair of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission, in saying that men can't become women and men can't use women's single-sex spaces, was appalling. So are you sure the government really accepts this?
I am totally sure of that. And I think, well, a couple of things. One is just shows the idiocy of writing these things down on WhatsApp groups. People think WhatsApp is secret.
It's okay if they think it and we don't know about it.
I just don't think that people should be putting this stuff out there, because if you write it in WhatsApp, you may as well stick it in the Daily Mail. We all know that. But second of all, the government is of one mind on this, because the Supreme Court obviously.
Well, they're not. No, but they're obviously not, because the issue isn't that we found out about it. The issue is that they think it.
Well, they would say that they've been taken out of context, and I think
they could say that, but it's not true, because we've seen the messages in full.
I just think that the Supreme Court gave us absolute clarity. The Prime Minister has made it clear. You've seen cabinet ministers this morning echoing that view, and that's the view that will inform government policy. Full stop.
Here's the thing: he's a lawyer. The law was already clear. We already knew it, and yet he's been part of a government and a Labour Party. Tories were just as bad. Kemi Badenoch, new Tory leader, to be fair, she was solid on this all the time, even when it got a lot of grief for it. But the Labour Party, for years, has been pushing this agenda, saying that trans women are women, and that men who think they're women or dress up as women can use women-only safe spaces, including toilets, changing rooms. By the way, Labour members, Labour elected politicians in Scotland voting for the likes of Isla Bryson, a double rapist, to be allowed to be in a women's prison because he put on a wig and claimed he was trans. Now, I'm sorry, although we could see his todger through his leggings, so I'm not quite sure it was a very convincing little costume. I'm sorry, but how could anybody trust Labour on this issue?
Well, I think the reason is because Keir Starmer's made it absolutely clear that the Supreme Court judgment is the one that will inform government policy.
Okay, so today kids went back to school. People are going into work in hospitals and in local councils and in many public bodies, many of which are paying money to the organisation Stonewall. Used to be a fantastic gay rights organisation and charity. Now it's basically a misogynistic anti-women trans rights organisation. That body has been paid millions of pounds in total by public bodies paid for by taxpayers to give what has been completely incorrect legal advice to bodies about whether or not they have to provide single-sex spaces and the like. Should the government stop giving taxpayers money to this organisation?
Well, I think Stonewall itself has to look very closely at the judgment and question its own policies. I mean, I was a great supporter of Stonewall back in the 80s when we were fighting Clause 28, and it was a legitimate organisation. I do fear it's lost its way a bit since then.
So should the government stop giving my money to them?
Well, I think there needs to be, they need to look to themselves, first of all.
Answer the question.
And then I think that if they carry on, there is a question then about whether public money goes to them or not. I think that's a reasonable question to ask in the light of the Supreme Court judgment last week.
OK, let's also talk about league tables. Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, is announcing today that officials must publish the first detailed breakdown of offences committed by foreign criminals living in the UK while awaiting deportation. And we'll know basically the nationalities of the migrants with the highest rates of crime. Albanians, Romanians and Poles are expected to be among the worst offenders for crimes, including violence, robbery, theft and drug dealing. Now, previously, Home Office officials said it was too difficult to provide this sort of quality data, but she now said by the end of the year she wants to see that data. Now, I can't believe that's something Yvette Cooper's been keen on doing, but there's been a lot of public pressure for this information to come out. Do you think it's a good thing we should know these details?
Well, hang on. I think it's the exact opposite of that. I think she's very keen to get this information out there. She's come up against the blob telling her she can't. And as a strong minister, she said, well, actually, the public need to know, which is why these numbers will be in the public domain. And you should welcome that because you've been calling that for months.
I think all government data, all public data should be made public. But I mean, I just can't believe it's something that Yvette Cooper feels very strongly about personally, given Yvette Cooper doesn't really believe in borders, judging from my previous interviews with her.
Disagree completely. I think she wants the information out there and she's demanded it from her officials, and whatever the resistance, she's overcome it because she is a tough minister, and that's what we want. You know, ministers getting a grip and actually doing things that the public want is what this government should be all about. So, you know, this is actually good news.
Okay, it's good now.
What's clarity over the figures, and we'll be able to see what the true picture is, and not speculation, but actually see the numbers.
Okay, and once we see the true picture, what happens next? Because the point of often the figures, like for instance, we have league tables of schools or hospital trusts, is so that you can give information to the public and they make judgments about, you know, which school to send their child to or which hospital to have their operation in and the like. What would be the purpose of us knowing which particular groups of nationalities are responsible for the most crime in this country?
Well, I think A, it will help dismiss any mythology and, you know, people getting blamed if they're not actually to blame, and B, it will help us inform what the police do in terms of cracking down in gangs or whatever else. But, you know, as ever, we should have the policy based on the evidence. So getting the evidence out there of who is doing what and what the numbers tell us will then help shape the public policy response, and that's, you know, the best kind of policy.
Well, I mean, it won't be, of course, it won't be everybody who's a foreign national in the country, will it? Because it's only those awaiting deportation, which will be a very small number from people in this country. But we certainly seen some stats that have been compiled, this country and others, which do suggest there are certain nationalities from certain parts of the world who have a much, much higher crime rate than other nationalities. Should we think about, well, much tougher policies in terms of immigration for people coming from countries where there has been a demonstrated higher rate of criminality?
Well, I think the answer is actually if it proves that there are certain nationalities involved in gangs, let's say, who are coming here to be part of criminal gangs, and that will help the police and the other authorities crack down on that particular form of criminality. But it's not because they are from that country, it's because they're being brought here to be part of gangs and organised crime, and that will help the police do their job. So, you know, getting the evidence out there is a really good idea. That's a good news story today, along with breakfast clubs. That's the other good news story that I'm sure we're going to come to.
Yep.
But it will help the police do their jobs better. So who's going to disagree with that?
I mean, it'd be nice if the police did do their job better and arrest people who commit actual crimes, than rather than hurting words on Twitter. Perhaps people holding up placards calling for the death of women activists might be a good start. Let's talk about the breakfast clubs. Why on earth do we need to provide breakfast to kids whose parents can perfectly easily afford to give them breakfast?
I think it's a brilliant policy, this, because it first of all buys time for parents, and we all know, you know, some parents have a lovely idyllic start to their day with a cooked breakfast on the table for the children, but most of us,
who does that?
It's a bit chaotic, it's a bit of mayhem, a lot of shouting involved, and I've had that experience this morning myself. And I think the extra half hour and the extra money that we'll put in the pockets of parents, I think will be enormously welcome.
No, you're not putting that money in the pockets of parents, because parents are also taxpayers.
It'll save them money and time, time, you know, is money, and we don't work 9 to 5 anymore, and the transport system doesn't work. So, you know, most people's mornings are chaotic and difficult.
Oh, they're not actually. Well, I think those parents function perfectly well. I mean, I would say if you've had a morning like that today, get up a bit earlier.
Well, that's what I've been saying to my children as well. However, I do think
Labour parenting, everybody, Labour parenting. Do you want me to come and sort that out for you? It doesn't happen in my house, Paul.
It's a good idea for people to get into school. And what teachers will tell you is, of course, it means that it helps with discipline as well, because the kids are not going to be badly behaved or as badly behaved if they've got food in their tummies.
But again, I'm not disputing that children should be in school on time and have breakfast. I'm disputing who gives them the breakfast and who pays for it. I don't see why I, as a taxpayer, should pay for someone else's kid to get breakfast when they can afford it themselves.
Like saying I shouldn't pay for the local park because I don't have a dog that I walk. You know,
that's a public good that people can share in or not, Paul.
And so are well-disciplined kids who are learning in school.
Are there any jobs left for parents to do? Apparently, they don't have to teach their kids to clean their teeth. They don't have to feed them. They don't have to teach them. They don't have to teach them to sit upright or potty train them, because teachers are having to do some of that now.
These interventions are all helpful. Of course, we need to give parents the support, and it's a big mistake we got rid of the Sure Starts, by the way, because that's where a lot of parenting was.
That's where the middle-class parents went.
They
were largely used by middle-class parents. Those are the stats.
That's not fair.
That's not fair. It's a fact. It's not. I'm not.
And even if they are, I think the middle classes do need to buy into universal services like the National Health Service, like the comprehensive schools. Otherwise, they'll opt out and pay their own way, and then you get fractioned services. So good. If
maybe they still want their kids to go to school with kids whose parents can't be bothered to feed them breakfast.
I don't think it's a question of not being bothered. I think.
Oh, you think they can't afford it?
No, I think it's to do with time and the pressure of work. Both parents working, often have to leave the home before the kids have to, so the kids are often left on their own. And you just will help parents, in a difficult cost of living crisis.
You don't leave your kid if your kid can't listen, Paul. If your kid can't pour a bowl of cereal for themselves or put a piece of bread in the toaster, that kid can't legally be left alone. So that's a load of nonsense.
All the evidence is that breakfast clubs are successful. Now, this is a pilot scheme being rolled out this morning. It's 750 schools in all kinds of different schools all over the country. Let's see if it works.
We'll see if it works. Let's just spend some more taxpayers' money. Paul Richards, I appreciate your time. We've got to go to a break. Former Labour Special Advisor. Up next, Sir Bill Browder, Putin's #1 foreign enemy. Are we going to get peace in Ukraine? This is Talk.
Obviously not going to be sustainable. He's going to be asked it until he answers it. Yeah. And at the moment he's still, I think, officially on holiday, but there's not going to be any escaping having to make a statement one way or the other. If I were him, I'd try to get my word out before this Wednesday when it's Prime Minister's questions, or he could be very easily skewered on the issue, even though the Leader of the Opposition isn't brilliant and doesn't have a great track record of catching him out at PMQs. It's an obvious one to bring up, isn't it?
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is talk.
Home and Common Sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. Going to get Tom Slater's view on what our next guest has to say. Peace in Ukraine. Well, we had a truce, or did we, over Easter, announced by Vladimir Putin. That is well and truly over. Did it ever really begin? And will we actually get the peace in the next week that apparently Donald Trump thinks he could get? Let's talk about this with Sybil Browder. He's, of course, Putin's #1 foreign enemy and head of the global Magnitsky Justice Campaign. Very good morning, Sybil.
Good morning to you.
I mean, let's remember that Donald Trump talked about how he was going to get peace in Ukraine on day #1. Well, that's not worked out very well. It's no longer January. It is now mid-April. Do you think there is any chance at all there's going to be a peace deal this week? And what would it consist of?
I don't think there's going to be any peace deal this week. And the simple reason is because Putin has no reason to do a peace deal. Putin has started this war back in 2022 with very ambitious goals. He has not in any way modified or reduced his goals. And so there's no reason to think that in a situation where he feels like he's winning, he's going to do a peace deal. I just don't see that happening. And so the only thing that he did, the only concession that he made was to, when Donald Trump asked for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, after a month, he came up with a 30-hour, very conditional ceasefire, which wasn't a ceasefire. And so I think it's all total fantasy that there's going to be any peace deal. I think that it's not going to happen. And I think that we're still stuck in this whole mess of Vladimir Putin attacking the Ukrainians and threatening the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, and indeed Donald Trump said over the end of last week and over the weekend, basically they'll walk away from this if they don't get a deal. But this is the issue. When you put a time constraint on it and you basically say, I'm making it my mission, I'm going to be the guy who brings peace to Ukraine. He's put all of the, the balls well and truly, all the cards on the table, all in Putin's court. I'm mixing all my metaphors. And Putin can just sit there and wait. But you say he doesn't want peace now. Look, he's not winning as such. He's still only got 20% of Ukrainian territory, 20%. But he is, we talk about that meat grinder. He is losing far more men than Ukraine is, although he's got access to more men whose bodies he can throw onto the battlefield and care not a jot about. But we know his economy is in a terrible state. It's now entirely geared up on the war economy. Is there a part of him that will actually want some sort of ceasefire so that he can kind of regroup, get his military, get his economy back on track?
Well, I mean, the simple answer is that he's not accountable to anybody in his country. He's not living in a country like we live in, where if you lose a bunch of soldiers, you lose your job, or if the economy goes down, you lose your job. He's a dictator. Everybody's afraid of him. He's not going to lose his job. And so from his perspective, he's looking at this whole thing and he's saying, well, look at Donald Trump is giving me everything I want. Why he's now, most importantly, going to cut off Ukraine from U.S. military aid. This is a great moment. And for him, he's already sacrificed, close to 1 million soldiers. Why not keep it going and seeing if everybody else folds along with Trump? I think that's his position right now.
And when you talk about 1 million, again, Donald Trump always talks about millions have died. Of course, it's more than 1 million who were injured, in some catastrophically, but the deaths are in the sort of low hundreds of thousands, more of them on the Russian side than the Ukrainian side, which I think is very, very telling. There is a risk with Donald Trump, isn't there, when Putin's dealing with him? We saw how Donald Trump treated Zelensky, and I thought outrageously, and you and I have discussed that before in the White House and since. But there's also an element where we sort of say, oh, well, he's kowtowing an awful lot to Putin. But he can turn on a dime, Donald Trump. He can just change his mind and act very, very differently. Is there a risk that if Putin doesn't come to the table with something vaguely resembling a serious negotiating position, other than I get the whole of Ukraine, which seems to be his position, that actually Donald Trump could grow tired of him and actually feel the need to step up support for Ukraine, basically to shore up his own position?
Well, if you take like 5 steps back, not watching any of this whole thing and how Donald Trump has behaved towards Putin, you could say, well, yes, he's a very volatile character. Yes, he turns on a dime, all that kind of stuff. But he's shown no indication at any point whatsoever of wanting to take a tough stand with Putin. I mean, it's the body language, the regular language, everything is so clear. You know, when people said, well, Putin is delaying and he's prevaricating, Donald Trump, instead of saying getting mad at Putin, he said, well, yeah, you know, I do that sometimes as well. And so it's very difficult to imagine, based on what we know, what we've seen so far, him getting tough on Russia. I just don't see that happening. I could be proven wrong, and I'd love to be proven wrong. And so would a lot of Americans love to be proven wrong on that. But so far, Donald Trump has shown an immense kind of friendship towards Putin and animosity towards Ukraine, animosity towards the European Union, animosity towards Western liberal democracies.
Yeah.
And so it's very hard to imagine that all of a sudden he's going to change and become a human rights defender.
Yes, it is extraordinary. Just finally, how much do you think this ties in at all with his treatment of China and the tariff war? And again, every other country getting brought into that as well. But in terms of, was it 145% tariffs? I've lost track. What is it this week on China? In terms of trying to leave China out in the cold, China, of course, helping Russia with their funding, buying Russian oil and the like, and obviously concerns about, you know, control in the South China Seas. How much does this all tie in, do you think?
Well, again, if anyone wants to be incredibly generous towards Trump, you could say, well, he's trying to, you know, separate Russia from China. And that's the whole point of this. And he's saying that China is the bigger enemy and not Russia. But again, I don't buy that. At the end of the day, China is benefiting hugely from Russia. Russia is not going to stop selling oil to China. In fact, you know, Russia is friendly with China. Russia is friendly with Iran. Russia is friendly with North Korea, which are all, in theory, historically been the United States enemies. And so none of I don't think that he's playing four-dimensional chess. I think he's playing tic-tac-toe here, and he's not doing a very good job.
So Bill Browder, so appreciate you joining us. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Again, I find Trump's opinion on Putin and on Russia and Ukraine utterly bewildering. What do you think's going on?
No, it's a strange one, isn't it? I mean, it almost, when you had that big bust-up between Trump and Zelensky, the way in which he was talking about Putin and Russia was like, you know, we've been through a lot together. I think because
people are told lies about Putin.
Yeah.
How
so
awful.
Therefore they kind of relate to one another. Clearly they've always had, like, just personally a strange kind of connection. And there was also this kind of sense in which, because the Democrats went after him so much over Russiagate, this nonsense that he was some kind of Manchurian candidate, it has almost just, the partisanship of that has clouded his judgment, to put it lightly. That said, the last thing that Trump wants to look like in life and in politics is a sucker, is someone who's being played. And if it does get to the point where he keeps saying, oh, Putin wants peace, I want peace, we're going to strike a peace deal here, and you still see them breaking ceasefires, or you still see them continuing to up their aggression. At what point does he think, maybe I'm looking like the one who's being played here? I don't know.
I know, that's always my hope, that he would realise it was just he was being publicly humiliated himself. But again, since an awful lot of it, what he and his envoy, Steve Witkoff, spout, are just utterly made up pretend facts about Ukraine. It doesn't bode very well. Love to hear your thoughts on that. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call to have your say in any of the topics we're talking about. Up next, delighted we're going to be talking to a former Conservative government minister, Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg. This is Talk.
Good evening and welcome to Plank of the Week, the one show where you do not have to be worried about judgmental people, because we'll do all the judging for you. Let's just have a look at how Humsley Useless is now spending his time.
There goes your career, mate.
Over there a bit is over towards where all the migrants come in. He's jumping there. There he goes. He goes over the bar. Hello, and unfortunately, it catches on his Johnson.
If he's plank of the week, he's got a sizable plank.
That's a whole different show.
Plank of the Week, Fridays at 7 on Talk.
across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
A very, very good afternoon to you. Welcome back to the show. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Whether you're listening on DAB+ radio, on your smart speaker, or watching on YouTube, your connected device, I am very, very, very pleased that you're joining me. I'm Julia Hartley-Brewer, editor of Spiked Online. Tom Slater is also here in the studio. Very, very good afternoon to you. Coming up in now we're going to be talking more about the plans for the Pope Francis's funeral set for this coming Saturday at 9 o'clock UK time. We'll also talk more about his legacy. Also, why the nationalities of migrants awaiting deportation with the highest rates of crime will finally be revealed by the end of this year on official league tables. But why on earth were they not revealed before? What was everyone worried about? And the Tories have announced plans to scrap non-crime hate incidents. If only they'd been in power for all those years that they were being used while the Tories were in power. Tory leader Kemi Badenoch has proposed a new law to protect free speech that would ban police in almost all cases from collecting personal data where no crime has been committed. Plus, we're going to talk about the Quango boss who was paid a total of £145,000 a year to sit on the boards of nine different government bodies, managed to miss 1 in 4 meetings. I mean, not quite sure they were getting that 145k for. Anyway, we'll talk more about all of that and plenty more besides, and get to all of your calls. Lots coming in about a lot of the different topics we're talking about. Breakfast clubs. I don't understand why I'm paying for other people's kids to get breakfast. I don't mind a school having a breakfast club, but you have to pay for it. You can afford to buy your own bread and your own cereal and milk. I don't see why the rest of us should have to pay for it. But also, Keir Starmer finally breaking his silence on last week's Supreme Court landmark gender ruling. It was on Wednesday morning, that ruling. Taking him 6 days until he was finally back at school and was asked by journalists what he thought, and he said he welcomes the much needed clarity for women. But isn't part of the reason why we didn't have clarity, I mean, you and I thought we had clarity, was people like Keir Starmer saying that 99.9% of women don't have a penis. What is your reaction? Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Text the word talk and then your message to 87222. Get in touch with us on X at talkTV. Calls are charged at the national rate. Text costs £1 standard network rate message. Let's come to you for Tom Stage before we go to our first guest in this hour. Just on the trans issue, do you think this is going to be something that's going to be an issue? I mean, I don't know, the local elections next Thursday. Is it going to be an issue at the next general election? A lot of people just kind of want this issue to go away. Women's rights activists want it to go away because we would just like to have our single-sex spaces, and can we all just get on with it and stop the pretence that men can become women and can have a right to use our spaces? That was clarified by the law last week. But trans activists seem to, and I don't mean someone who's just living a life and wants to dress as or behave as if they are not the sex they were born. Carry on, fill your boots, do what you want. I don't care. Live your best life. I want you not to be discriminated against or in any way lose out in life, but you don't get my rights too. But I'm talking about the trans activists, the ones who are saying there's no such thing. The only kind of good turf is a dead turf and things like that. Do you think they want this to go away? Do you think the Labour Party and many of the activists in the Labour Party want it to go away?
I think certainly the Labour leadership would be very happy if this issue just quietly resolved itself. It became clear that I think they at the very least realised they were on the wrong side of public opinion, and that therefore wouldn't it be wonderful if Supreme Court judges took this out of their hands? They could have clarified the law at any point if they wanted to.
So did the Tories.
It should have been something that the Tory government did before they moved out of power, not least because it would have put pressure on Keir Starmer to keep it or to try and give in to the activists on his own side of the aisle. They want it to go away. It's not going to go away. First of all, because there's so much more work left to do. You've got institutions which have been captured by this ideology. Yeah. It's going to take a concerted push for that to reverse itself. It's also because of the campaigning of gender critical activists and women's rights activists and LGBT activists and various journalists who've been on to this for many years now. There is an interest in this issue. There is an awareness of this issue. People want to know when there is another horrendous breach of women's rights that takes place in a school or in a hospital or what have you. So these stories are going to continue to come up, and whether or not Keir Starmer wants it to go away, it's not going to go away. So it will continue to be a political issue, I think. But I do think that Supreme Court ruling and the general atmosphere now is certainly an opening for common sense and for women's rights to push back. It's just there's going to take a.
I think I'm not feeling that optimistic anymore. I really am not. I think there's going to be such pushback. Well, let's talk about this and plenty of other topics right now with Sir Jacob Rees. Welcome. So delighted he joins. He's a former Conservative government minister and MP, of course, and also a Catholic. Want to talk to him about the death of the Pope as well. A very good afternoon to you, Sir Jacob.
Oh, good afternoon. You've got GB News presenter, which is one of the key things that needs to be said too, so thank you.
Did it need to be said?
Yes, it did. No, top priority.
Top priority. I mean, the boss told you to do that. Well done, you. All right, then, let me ask you...
Well, no, I'm very keen on it.
All right. So, Jacob, move on. Let's talk first of all about trans, and in particular, the Prime Minister saying he's really pleased with the Supreme Court ruling. His first comments took 6 days since that verdict last week, saying he welcomes much needed clarity on the issue. Did we need clarity on that issue?
No, of course we didn't need clarity. Anybody with any sense knew the truth. Women and men are biologically created at the point of conception and grow from that. And this whole argument has been faintly ridiculous and the position of the Labour Party absurd.
Well, it has been ridiculous and it has been absurd, but I hate to tell you, all of this happened under a Tory watch. You guys were in office, you were in government, at the senior level as a cabinet minister for a very long time. While this whole ideology grew, while women and girls were losing their basic rights. Again, the law didn't change last week. It was clarified as what the law always should have been. The 2010 Equality Act gives women the right to single-sex basis and girls. And yet, under the Tories, we saw mixed toilets in schools, at work. In many public places, we saw trans ideology thrust down the throats of pretty much anyone and everyone in the public and private sector, all across the civil service. You guys did absolutely nothing about it. Why not?
Well, that's simply not true. Alistair Jack vetoed an effort by the Scottish government to enforce automatic recognition of whatever anybody felt like in a major constitutional clash. He really showed great courage in doing that.
He spoke out when they wanted to
under the devolution settlement.
Come on, he spoke out when they were going to put a double rapist into a women's prison, for goodness sake. Do you know how many men are currently in women's prisons in England?
Hold on. No, hold on. That's what you're saying isn't accurate. He acted in response to a bill that was going through the Scottish Parliament. He didn't react to an individual issue because that wasn't under his jurisdiction.
I realise
he reacted to what was under his jurisdiction, which was to stop a bill going through, and that was then taken through the courts, and he won. It was a major victory for the Union, but it was, as in the United Kingdom, and it was also a major victory for common sense. So the Conservatives did do that. If you look at any of the things I said during this period, I made it clear that I understood the difference between a man and a woman. But the point of our courts is that they establish what the law says. Parliament passes laws, and then people push them in one direction or another, and ultimately the courts decide. That's their proper role. Government ministers do not adjudicate on the law.
Oh, but okay, once there was some confusion over what the word woman meant, I mean, still can't work out how that happened. At that point, there could have been a law, certainly under Boris Johnson. He had a massive big majority, as did, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak, could easily pass the law saying, to clarify, a woman is biologically, is a biological woman, an adult human being.
Right.
There was never any clarity.
And what would have happened if that law had been passed? It would have then gone to the courts to be judged upon by the courts, exactly what has just happened. And you'd have had people going on human rights grounds as well, which there is a potential appeal to the European Court of Human Rights on this, which I believe is not going to be used. But nonetheless, Parliament passes the law, as was done when the Conservatives were in office. The judges determine it. The judges have determined that the law that was passed when the Conservatives were in office, or implemented when the Conservatives were in office, made it clear what a woman was and what a man is. So it's really very straightforward. And you can't try and snipe at the Conservatives for things that weren't our fault. There were many things that were our fault.
Oh, I mean, I haven't got time. We've only got you for a little while because you've got a GB News show to do. Do you know how many? You talk about what's going on in Scotland, but Sir Jacob, do you know how many men are imprisoned in women's prisons in England right now?
I have no idea, but there shouldn't be any. It's completely ridiculous.
Yeah, but why are they? Because
it's absolutely absurd.
But it was a Tory law. You said it was all really clear, and yet this has had to happen, and the Tories did absolutely nothing.
It's now been It's now been made clear at the Supreme Court, the laws that existed. And things that happened previously when people didn't understand the law can now be corrected. That's how law works.
Okay,
the law is established on the basis of judgments.
So, Jacob, for the entire time the Tories were in power, my and everyone else's listening's taxpayers' money was being given to organisations like Stonewall to go into civil service, virtually every government department, schools, hospitals, everywhere, private sector as well, to basically being paid huge sums of money, of taxpayers' money, to completely and utterly undermine a law brought in by the Tories. And you guys let it happen.
Well, hold on a moment. We actually stopped giving money to Stonewall. Government departments stopped giving money to Stonewall once it was discovered what they were up to.
But it was going on for years.
In the 2020s.
Exactly.
Yeah, but hold on. Stonewall was a respectable charity that became an unrespectable charity. It was being given money when it was respectable. It then started doing unrespectable things, and the money stopped. That's how government works. Governments are not omniscient. That's we may come on to Holy Father. That's a responsibility of God, not of governments. Governments respond to things that happen. When they go wrong, they take choices. And the choice was made to take money away from Stonewall when it was clear what they were doing and that what they were doing was idiotic.
It was clear
That's proper government.
It was clear to an awful lot of us many years beforehand. Can I ask you, just a very few hundred yards from where you're standing right now, on College Green, outside Parliament, there was a demonstration on Saturday by trans rights activists, some of them saying, with placards saying things like, bring back witch burning, I heart, I'm going to use the term weeing on TERFs, not the term that means women activists, and the only good TERF is a dead TERF. No police action at that time, defacing of statues, including Millicent Fawcett, a leading suffragist, and Nelson Mandela as well, major civil rights activist. Do we have two-tiered justice in this country?
And don't forget Jan Smuts. Because Jan Smuts helped us to win the war and is a very important figure. He may be less politically correct, but he was a very important figure in helping us to win the war. You and I often discuss freedom of speech, and we should allow freedom of speech even when people are saying things that we don't agree with. But there are laws that stop incitement to violence, and there are certainly laws that stop criminal vandalism. So I think the laws should be applied fairly, whether it's a Palestinian protest, whether it's a farmers' protest, or whether it's these extremists who are protesting at the weekend. I think freedom of speech should be given as broad a rein as possible, and the level for prosecution should be incitement to violence. So if they incite to violence, they should be prosecuted for that, but clearly criminal damage is obviously an offence, and they should be prosecuted for that. And the police still have questions to answer on two-tier policing, and there are real issues with that.
OK, I want to ask you, but I will come on to, obviously, the death of Pope Francis in a few moments. But can I ask you just about some polling over the weekend, two different polls showing support for both Nigel Farage and Reform increasing. We've got local elections next week and a by-election. Let's not mention any constituencies or candidates. It just gets ourselves into Ofcom difficulties.
I know the rules.
You know the rules very well as well. But let's talk about, the voters seem to think that it's just as likely that Nigel Farage will be Prime Minister at the next election, general election, as Keir Starmer. Kemi Badenoch, Tory leader, not even in the running really in terms of that poll, but also the possibility that Reform could actually end up with the largest number of seats in the next Parliament. What do you make of that?
Well, Nigel Farage is an enormously capable politician, a very effective campaigner, and somebody who has his pulse on what the British people are thinking. So it's not surprising that he is doing well. The difficulty for Reform is that other than Nigel, there's nothing there. Nigel is the be-all and the end-all of Reform, and therefore they're very dependent on him. And if Reform got this huge number of seats at the next election, how would it form a government? Who would the chance of the Exchequer be? None of these questions are answered, and I think as we got closer to a general election, those would be questions at the forefront of people's minds. So I would very much like to see a cooperation between Reform and the Conservative Party, as I think most Conservatives and most Reform supporters believe in broadly the same things.
A lot of people are talking about that, but there's an awful lot of people, the Tories, who could easily put a yellow rosette on and stand for the Liberal Democrats. There are also an awful lot of people in Reform who simply don't trust you guys in the Tories. And you're no longer an MP, but people just feel like you guys talked the talk again, whether it was on the trans thing. Kemi Badenoch, being very sound on that. Non-crime hate incidents, she wants to get rid of them. But they were brought in by the College of Policing in 2014. Again, long time before this government, your government was out of office. People simply don't trust the Tories to do the things they say they're going to do. Isn't that the issue?
Well, any party that's in office for a long time will have blots on its escutcheon, and there are certainly blots on the Conservative escutcheon. The question is, what do you want by way of a government? Who do you want in that government? How do you want to achieve it? And if the Conservatives and Reform unite, there is the prospect of a huge majority that can do proper Conservative things. And if there are people who are basically Lib Dems, well, they'll have to go along with it, I think. They'll find that the Conservative Party and the Reform Party is what the country want. They want conservatism.
Well, we shall wait and see what happens there. Just finally, I say you are a Catholic, a very prominent Catholic in the British political scene in Westminster. The announcement yesterday that Pope Francis had died at the age of 88. We've already had a meeting of the cardinals to agree his funeral. It's going to take place in Rome next Saturday morning, about 9 o'clock UK time. What is Pope Francis's legacy? What will you think will be the biggest takeaway from his 12 years as Pope?
Well, as always with popes, there's a strong element of continuity. The perpetual teaching of the Church is unchanged, but the emphasis is different with each pope. Pope Francis emphasised God's forgiveness, which it's always important to remember, and to remember that we are all in need of it, particularly, obviously, me.
He was in lots of ways, certainly in his words, and not sure any Catholic, any Pope, all Popes are Catholic, is so much so in his deeds, but he was very woke in terms of his stances on things like climate change, on refugees, on Gaza, talked the talk on lesbian and gay rights, some of it not actually sort of carried through in reality. Do you think that the heads of any church, whether it's the Catholic Church or the Church of England, in terms of our Archbishop of Canterbury here, need to get more involved in politics because it is a big part of sort of morality, or should they move away from politics?
Oh, I mean, it was established by the end of the Middle Ages that the papacy was responsible for spiritual affairs, not for secular affairs, and that's a very good position to be in. The Pope obviously called for peace. That's a sort of thing that popes ought to do. Christ turned the other cheek. The Pope understandably values the individual. So when he was talking about immigration, he was talking about the individual who should be valued. It's politicians who have to deal with the numbers, with the hundreds of thousands, and whether that is possible. And in terms of gay rights and so on, none of the teaching of the Church changed. It's all remained exactly the same, but he was open to forgiving people if they were in need of forgiveness, and that's a proper papal thing to do. It's a power given to St. Peter by Christ. Those whose sins you bind are bound, and those whose sins you release are released. That's a papal prerogative.
And in terms of who will succeed him as Pope, the cardinals will be meeting to decide that. We'll have these long meetings, these enclaves where they're very sort of locked in a room and have to come to a decision, and it's either black smoke if they haven't made a decision, white smoke if they have. Lots of talk about, I mean, again, it's a bunch of men who are making decisions. Many of them are actually appointed by Pope Francis during his term in office. They'll be making a decision. In terms of who are the front runners, and what they would espouse, do you have any favourites? Do you have any idea on who it might be?
I don't. I have confidence the Holy Ghost will make a good decision. The two old lines are that young cardinals vote for old popes. Doesn't always work. Pope Leo XIII was very old and went on for a very long time, so they sometimes get a bit surprised by that. And the other line, given to me by the Archbishop of Southwark, who you can watch on GB News between 8 and 9 this evening. Oh, for goodness sake, Jacob. Said to me that if you go into the conclave as a pope, you come out as a cardinal.
Fair enough. I'm going to leave it there. Anyone else you want to plug? Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, former Conservative government minister and Catholic, and apparently he's got a show somewhere. Tom Slater, I mean, goodness me. I do find it fascinating when someone like Jacob, he's a very staunch Catholic, and no disrespect to anybody's religious views. We welcome all, one and all here, religious, views, whatever. Talking about, the Holy Ghost will make the decision. It is still fascinating, and even with our head of our church here in the UK, in Church of England, the Queen or the King, this idea that these people have a special link with God and are chosen, the cardinals come and through the Holy Spirit they choose the Pope. As an atheist, I find this very very difficult to come to terms with.
No, absolutely, and I'm an atheist myself, and it's one of those things where it's quite striking when you see still what a large role kind of spirituality, God, religion plays in billions upon billions of people's lives the world over.
Less and less in Britain, though. We have 6 million Catholics. We have a lot of people who claim to be CV, but they go to maybe Mass on Christmas Eve.
No, absolutely, and there's often a lot of soul searching within the church as to why those flocks are kind of diminishing. But I think there's also on the atheistic side, it's worth kind of asking the question, you know, what is it about a kind of more secular, rational kind of enlightenment politics that seems to lack a certain something. Some people, they still, you know, feel that there's questions that can only be answered in a more religious setting. So it's just fascinating that even though we sometimes like to think of ourselves in a kind of post-God era, those questions are still very important, profoundly important for billions of people around the world.
Absolutely. 12:22 is the time. We're going to take a break. We'd normally take your calls after this time, but we're going to be talking to Lord Young. He's the Tory peer and founder of the Free Speech Union, about non-crime hate incidents. Tories want to scrap them. That's up next. And I promise, after 12:30, we will get to your calls. Give us a call on all the topics we're talking about today. 0344 499 1000. Lots of your texts and tweets coming in too. This is Talk.
In some ways, I think his legacy is very helpful, because I think the very chaos that he brought to the church, you know, he issued a number of documents which had some very ambiguous language in them, and people say, well, what do they mean? In fact, there's half a dozen cardinals exercise their right to a dubia, which says, please explain to us, you have a duty to do it. We need to know what this meant. And he blanked them, which was just, I mean, we still haven't recovered from it. So I think what he did was he shows us what Catholicism and Christianity looks like when it's ambiguous, and it doesn't look very good.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense. Let's go to my next guest now, Lord Toby Young. He's a Tory peer, founder of the Free Speech Union, and joins us to talk about non-crime hate incidents. Because, Toby Young, very excitingly, Kemi Badenoch, the Tory leader, wants to get rid of them. Why did they not do that all those years they were in power?
Well, there's more rejoicing in heaven, Julia, when a sinner converts.
I think Kenny Badenoch was always opposed to them, to be fair, yeah.
I think so, yes. And also, to be fair, the Tories did lay a statutory instrument in 2023 which urged the police to use more common sense, introduced a code of practice, said you should no longer be recording non-crime hate incidents if they relate to incidents in playgrounds. So they did make an effort to at least rein in the recording of NCHIs, but it hasn't worked. Research carried out by the Free Speech Union based on FOI requests discovered that actually there's been a slight increase in the number of NCHIs being recorded since the new guidance was introduced in 2023. So it's time, I think, that more drastic action was taken.
Well, absolutely. And again, funnily enough, I don't think they're going to get this through because this is just an attempt to sort of add an amendment to a law. But of course, the Tories don't have that power. Just explain what non-crime hate incidents are there, because I mean, I suppose it says exactly what it says on the tin. But why are the police getting involved in anything that isn't a crime?
Yeah, well, that's a really good question. A non-crime hate incident typically is recorded when the police receive a report of a hate crime and they conclude no crime has been committed. Instead of just ignoring it or closing the case, they record it as a non-crime hate incident. And the really alarming thing about them is that they can show up if you are required to do an enhanced criminal records check, if you apply for a job working with vulnerable people, such as if you apply to become a teacher.
Yeah.
And the fact that you haven't committed a crime can show up on your criminal record in one of these enhanced checks, and it can stop you getting the job.
And you may not even know about it. Now, I know an awful lot of people, like as I did, applied to their local police force to find out if there was a non-crime hate incident recorded against them after some, Alison Pearson's case, which turned out to be they thought it was actually a crime, not a non-crime hate incident, that she, of course, hadn't committed with a tweet. And I applied back in November, and I finally, last week, got a response to the Met Police, even though Metron Police, like all other police forces, are required to give their responses within a month. And I pointed this out to them every 2 weeks, and I know you and the Free Speech Union, as my union representatives, also pointed this out to them. I'm not going to lie. I'm really disappointed to discover I have no recorded non-crime hate incidents against me, Lord Young. And I worry, frankly, I just don't think I need to up my game, frankly.
Well, I mean, I'm shocked.
We all are.
We think that about 250,000 non-crime hate incidents have been logged in England and Wales alone since 2014, and we calculate that that's over 62 a day. So I can't imagine why they've omitted you.
How? I mean, I just don't think I've been making enough effort. But this is the thing: people don't realise this isn't someone sort of shouting, or I don't know, holding up a placard saying "Bring back witch burning," or the only turf is a dead turf, and things like that. This trans activist demonstration in Parliament, where no arrests, as far as we're aware, have yet been made regarding those outrageous incitements to violence. And yet people have got NCHIs recorded against them because someone else perceived that someone else might perceive that what you had said was a hate speech, even if it wasn't. And you've got a police record of this, even though you haven't said anything. I mean, you could have said things like a trans woman is not a woman. You could have an NCHI against you right now.
Oh, definitely. Rachel McLean, when she was vice chair of the Conservative Party, effectively said about a rival candidate in a neighbouring constituency that it was actually a man in a wig and not a woman, which was factually correct.
Yeah.
And had an NCHI recorded against her name as a consequence. And the Free Speech Union applied to get that removed, and after some effort, it was removed. And that was a vice chairman of the Conservative Party.
Yeah.
There was a chap the number of trivial incidents that have been taken seriously enough by the police to investigate and then record as NCHIs is quite astonishing. I mean, my favourite example is a man in Bedfordshire complained that whenever his neighbour saw him, he whistled the theme tune to Bob the Builder. And the neighbour, this was somehow motivated by hatred of one of his protected characteristics, God knows which one. And the police duly investigated. And then when they concluded, incredibly, that it wasn't actually a crime to whistle the theme tune to Bob the Builder, they recorded it as an NCHI.
I'm going to have that tune in my head for the rest of my life. Just finally, I know we haven't got you for very long, Lord Young, but I mean, we had that Supreme Court ruling on women's rights. It wasn't about trans people, it was about women's rights, sex-based rights last week. We finally got the Prime Minister, who's been remarkably busy for 6 days, unable to actually make a comment, saying he welcomes the clarity. I know that from speeches you've made, the Free Speech Union, that a huge percentage of the work you guys do there, and I'm a member of the union, as I say, is actually to basically help people who are being disciplined in their workplace for the most completely, you know, making the same statement the Supreme Court made, that trans women are not women and that women are based on biological sex. Do you think that this is now a victory, we all move on, or do you think we've still got a lot of work to do to get sanity back into our public and private lives?
I fear, given the reaction that we've seen since the Supreme Court judgment, particularly the demonstrations over the weekend, that it's going to take more than this judgment to persuade trans rights activists and their woke allies that they have to accept that biological men should not be granted access to single-sex women's spaces. They show no signs of having accepted that. No. They're even disputing, I think, the judgment. I mean, it might be quite helpful, Julia, if someone reported the Supreme Court justices to the Met, accusing them of having committed a hate crime.
Happy to help.
Conclusion. And then the police will inevitably record it as an NCHI, and then perhaps it'll point up to people just how ridiculous the whole NCHI regime is. I mean, I think it's fantastic, really. We shouldn't gloss over the fact it's fantastic that the Conservatives are now committed to scrapping NCHIs. As you say, the amendment may not get through in the Commons, given the size of Labour's majority, but we'll try again in the Lords. I think it'll have more chance in the Lords than it does in the Commons, where Labour don't currently have a majority. And even if it fails in the Lords, God willing, if the Tories win the next general election, then they'll actually get rid of them.
Fingers crossed. Lord Young, Tory peer, founder of the Free Speech Union, thank you so much for joining us. 12:33 is the time. Tom Slater, I mean, we should definitely report the Supreme Court for that horrifically transphobic ruling last Wednesday, shouldn't we?
And it's been very funny as well, watching people who were shocked and appalled that anyone might criticise the Supreme Court when they made a ruling that went against them, were suddenly very forthcoming in their criticisms of the justices in that case.
We live in such
hypocrisy all round.
Yeah, we just live in such a hypocritical, mad world where up is down and black is white, and it is so mind-numbing. I can completely understand why so many people go, oh, for God's sake, I can't even deal with this madness anymore. And I really understand why people do feel that way, because it's all so stupid. How on earth do we over the last week having conversations about you know, women's toilets, and you're allowed in women's toilets, and what is a woman? It's properly mad when there are. I mean, I think that is a genuine real issue. It's a genuine real issue in terms of women's and girls' safety and rights, hard fought for rights. But we've got so many problems in this country. We have so many things that need to be dealt with, and the fact that we have to spend any time on this madness, it's not our fault. We're the same people just saying, can we just go back to the sanity we knew, you know, I don't know, just 12, 13 years ago? But it's mad that anyone should have to spend any time asking the Prime Minister when he's out on a visit to a school, and he's off talking to British soldiers as well, about whether or not what a woman is and whether he welcomes a court ruling on that. We are not a serious country when that happens.
No, and whilst people might want it just to go away, it's not just going to go away. And I think it's almost insufficient to just be unwoke, to not believe in this stuff. You've got to be kind of actively anti-woke in a sense for this to actually be pushed back.
Your workplace, whether in the public sector or the private sector, your kid's school, right now, go in, find out, are males allowed into the female single-sex spaces? And honestly, get in touch. Find yourself a lawyer. It'll be no win, no fee. It's an easy win. We're going to stop this. But I think it's not going to be coming from the gods on high. It's not going to come from central authority. It is going to be individuals winning. Or, I mean, Maya Forstadt, again, this is all established with Maya Forstadt's tribunal and her appeal court judgment.
The whole gender critical movement is a demonstration of the fact you have to fight this on all fronts, and you have to do it from the grassroots upwards. Otherwise, you're not going to see the change that everyone wants.
Some of us have been talking about this for quite a long time. Some might say banging on about it. Proved right in the end. as always. Why don't they just pay attention from word go? 12:36 this time. Up next, we are going to hear from you on lots of different issues, including women and those horrific protests and what Keir Starmer's had to say. Also about breakfast clubs. Why on earth is more of our taxpayers' money going on feeding kids in school? Aren't kids supposed to be fed by their own parents? This is Talk, the home of common sense.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
This is Talk, the home of common sense with me, Julia Hartley-Brewer. 12:38 is the time. Tom Slater's also with us. Let's get some of your messages coming in thick and fast at talkTV and at on text on 87222 about Keir Starmer finally deigning after 6 days to speak about the Supreme Court landmark gender ruling, saying he welcomes the much-needed clarity for women. But isn't he part of the problem why we didn't have clarity on what a woman was? Molly says, yeah, it's too little, too late. Kevin says the Labour Central Office statement was released 6 days too late. Archie says biology is what makes a woman a woman. The world is nuts. Why has it taken Britain so long to catch up on the facts? Christopher says, interesting, isn't it, that someone legally qualified occupying the office of Prime Minister needs a court case decided by the highest court in the land to tell him what a woman is. I wonder how he gets up in the morning. I mean, you do wonder, don't you? Ken says, much needed clarity. So a grown man who's also a lawyer, husband and father needed clarity from the Supreme Court. Tell me you're silly without actually saying it. Howie says, how can he run the country when he doesn't know what a woman is? Laura says it took him 6 days to come to terms with basic common sense and scientific reality. People are not happy, are they, Tom?
Not at all, because it just looks so cowardly, so feeble. The fact
looks
that
or is?
Is, absolutely. The way in which he had to wait for Supreme Court justices to tell him what a woman is, does he require their instruction as how to tie his shoelaces or how to cross the road? I mean, it's just so embarrassing. This has become a huge issue, not least because people like Keir Starmer made it a huge issue, because they would go out in front of television cameras, they would go out in front of audiences and would struggle visibly with something that a 5-year-old has got pretty much down. This whole chapter has been humiliating for them. It's not just that they were wrong, they were shown up to be idiotic, captured by hysteria, buffoons. And
lying, deceitful buffoons. I have to say, every now and then, if I want to cheer myself up, I do just watch that video of that interview with Nicola Sturgeon about whether or not Isla Bryson, a double rapist, should be allowed in a women's prison well, a rapist is male, but is this rapist male? It's an absolute joy. But again, Keir Starmer just as much tongue-tied on this issue. Let's go to your phone line. The phone call's on this as well. 0344 499 1000 is the number to call. Louise is in Kent. Louise, surely you are delighted the Prime Minister is so pleased with the Supreme Court ruling and has provided all that clarity, right?
No, well, I hate to tell you this to you. I still don't think he gets it.
I agree.
Because if you listen to what he said, yes, a woman is an adult human female.
Yeah.
He's missed the bit that it's a biological female.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
exactly.
therefore,
Because
he's
we're right.
still adding confusion because these trans people will say, but a trans woman is a woman, a female, a human
Exactly.
female. So Keir Starmer is still missing the point.
No,
Yeah,
absolutely, and it was really interesting when they started taking the woman word, the activists saying trans women, they were all women, and then women activists started saying, well, okay, we're going to use the word female. We gave up the word woman, which I still object to. There's only one kind of woman. We're not a subset of any other kind. But then people started using female, and then they started saying no, they are female as well. So you can't win. But I'm with you. He said, yeah, a woman is an adult female, and the court has made that absolutely clear. But the rest of us didn't need the court to tell us that. It was already in law and it was already common sense. So why did he, as a barrister, a former director of public prosecutions, need to hear that ruling?
But the other bit they need to get rid of, Julia, is this stupid comment that a baby is assigned a sex at birth. They've got their language understanding
That was
wrong.
Dawn Alford, wasn't it?
Assigning is choosing.
What was the name? There was a Labour MP, Dawn somebody.
But it's crazy, but it's in common language now. If you assign something, you're choosing it. You're looking at the baby and saying, well, I can see a boy's bits there. But you know what? I'm going to decide actually assign it as a female. No, it's a boy because you're seeing boys' bits. You observe the sex at birth.
Yeah.
So they don't know their language either.
How do you think we got into this madness? And are you confident that with the Supreme Court ruling that everything changed? Because there was a lot of celebration. I was as pleased as those activists were on Wednesday and Thursday as well. I mean, we've been banging on about this for years on this show. But I am not as confident as other people seem to be that this all changes now.
Either, and partly because also in the Supreme Court ruling, if you think about it, he also said that, yes, biological women use that, but whatever we do with other things, it must be proportionate. Therefore, if you've got a trans woman who's had full surgery, and I mean everything off, and redone, well, I don't have a problem with them using the same changing room as me, because probably I wouldn't even know.
Yeah, and that's the key difference. And I don't think people did when it wasn't a big bloke in a dress pretending and basically play acting. I mean, again, we want to be welcoming and things, but at the end of the day, we also need to have, priority given to the safety and rights of women. Again, that ruling wasn't about trans people last week. That ruling was about women. It was about us, 51% of the population.
We've got to be proportionate and kind, which women are, incidentally.
I think women should be less kind. I think we got ourselves into this mess because women wanted to be kind.
Yes.
I'm not kind to a man basically being misogynistic, putting my daughter or anyone else's daughter at risk in a bathroom, or wanting to be in a women's refuge, or a rapist who claims that he thinks he's a woman and getting into women's prisons so he can rape and sexually assault women prisoners behind bars. I don't think we should be kind to those people.
And was it Helen Joyce, when she first started talking about it, she said there was a day when if men wanted to dress up in women's clothing, they did it in their bedrooms.
Yeah, I do think, I really think people need to be very clear about what this movement is. Louise, thank you very much indeed. And this is the thing, Tom Satan, this is something a lot of people felt very anxious about doing it. There are people with gender dysphoria who genuinely believe they're born in the wrong body. They are wrong. They are not. In the same way that an anorexic who thinks they're fat but there's actually only 6 stone is wrong. It's a mental health disorder, and they deserve empathy and respect and kindness and as much help as possible. And then there are people, men who get a kick out of dressing up as a woman or pretending to be a woman, gaining access to women's spaces. And then there are men who just pretend that they think that women just as a misogynistic power move against women. And we need to separate those three groups. But I have a horrible feeling that actually the last two are the ones who've been taking over the activism, as opposed to people who are just quietly living their life and just say, I feel like I'm born as a woman. Live your life, that's fine. You don't get to have my rights, but we need to separate those groups, don't we?
No, absolutely. So many things have been put under this umbrella. Everyone from previously what were considered to be sort of transsexuals, as was previously referred to, through to
well, transvestites. I mean, Eddie Izzard, he was a trust.
Exactly, and then a generation later, somebody's identifying as transgender. You've got the they-them thing, which is people who've got too much time on their hands, as far as I can tell. These are very different phenomena, and the fact that they've all been lumped into the same bracket and treated like it's a kind of civil rights movement, united around the idea that women should shut the hell up and get used to their spaces being invaded by people who aren't women. It's that nonsense. People are seeing through that spell now.
The giveaway on the civil rights thing, the comparison with the suffragettes and with Martin Luther King and all of that, Nelson Mandela, I mean, all of the justification, even for violence on occasion, from the ANC in South Africa and from the suffragettes to a certain extent in the early 1900s, is always predicated to say we want our civil rights. There are no rights that trans people don't have that everyone else has. None at all.
And the ruling makes that abundantly clear.
But also, the protected characteristic, blah, blah, blah. But also, crucially, when women gained rights to vote and things like that, their own finances and things, and when gay people gained the same rights to marriage and things like that, straight people, they didn't take anyone else's rights away.
No,
they just gained their own rights. Same with black people with the vote in America and places like that. Trans rights are so different. It's just so different. Lots of your calls we're not going to get to, but I want to get to Pete, who's on the line from Bath. Pete, you want to talk about breakfast clubs?
Hello, Julia.
Hello.
Yeah, I do.
What do you want to say?
I'm sick to death of hearing all about it. From 1939 to 45, there was millions and millions of single women because their husbands was at war. They was away.
Yeah.
The benefit system didn't come in until 48.
Yeah.
They survived. I'm 80.
They fed their kids, yeah.
Yeah. And my mother, I'm 80. My mother had to go through all the hardships of feeding me. She had 2 other kids. And then after the war, they were still rationing. So it was not easy. But we was fed before we went to school. We might have only had a sandwich, but we had something. And I just think that I used to say that kids was little Iwanas, medium Iwanas, and big Iwanas. And now it's turned a lot of their parents are turned into Iwanas. Yeah. And they want everybody else to supply things for them.
Well, that's the thing. Again, the poorest people across the world who manage to feed their kids, but apparently our parents are too busy, too lazy, too poor to be able to feed their own kids. I would argue in that case, don't have kids.
I agree with you. My wife didn't work for 14 years because she had 3 kids to bring up.
Yeah. That said, a lot of mums would like to be able to do that or work part-time around the kids' schooling, and they just simply can't afford to do that. The cost of living now, the cost of rent or mortgage too high. Lots of women would love that choice.
But we struggled.
Yeah.
I'll be quite honest with you. There was times when, and I hate to admit it, there was times when I used to have to steal from the allotments to help feed the kids. This was back in the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah, that is quite something to admit to. But you made sure your kids were fed. Pete, thank you so much. I so appreciate you calling in, Pete in Bath on Breakfast Clubs there. It's coming up to 12:49. Up next, we're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to be talking about a Quango boss who was paid $145k to sit on the boards of 9 different government bodies. Managed to miss, though, a quarter of all the meetings. What are we paying these people for? This is Talk, the Home of Common Sense.
idea is that the police collect intelligence that might inform incidents that are going to erupt at some later stage. But of course, as is always the case with these things, it's just got out of control to the point where the police forces across the UK are spending literally millions of pounds policing incidents that just aren't criminal. There's no logic to it. It's as though the police are playing at being police officers.
Across the UK, on DAB+, on your smart speaker, on your smart TV, and on your side. This is Talk.
Very, very good afternoon to you. This is Talk, the home of common sense. Right, Tom Sater's still with me. He's the editor of Spiked Online. Tom, have you been ever offered any sort of board membership, directorship on a quango of any sort?
Unfortunately not. I'm waiting by the phone for.
I know. I mean,
seriously,
what have we been doing wrong in life? Because it does look like it's got a kind of money for nothing, and quite literally in some cases. And it does seem to be the same people doing the same thing.
With the same set of views.
Same set of views. Yeah. There's a man called Martin Spencer, and he was appointed as a non-executive board member of Ofsted, Companies House, the NHS Counter-Fraud Authority. Good to know they've got one, to be fair. And the Criminal Cases Review Commission, the people who make horrible mistakes about cases of people put behind bars, and among many, many others. He sat on more quango boards in 22 to 23 than any other individual in the public sector. He held 9 such positions. This is according to research from the Taxpayers Alliance. Total pay for those roles, 9 different roles, was £145,000 a year. And all he had to do as part of that was to attend 65 meetings in total a year for all of those different bodies. And yet he still managed to miss 18 of them. That's a quarter of them. The man still managed not to do a quarter of his job, and yet he's paid 145k a year. I mean, what is that, 5-6 times the average income? How on earth is this happening, and why is it happening on our dime? Let's talk to Darwin Friend, who's the head of research at the Taxpayers Alliance and joins us now. Hello, Darwin.
Good afternoon, Julia. Thanks for having me on the show.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and indeed for you guys at the Taxpayers Alliance publicising this. I mean, there are so many of these people that just on board and directorship. Now, there's plenty of directorships in the private sector, and everyone just, you hit your diversity target, and this person, that person, and people who just, the great and the good, and they sit on these boards. The public sector also do it, but it's a lot of the same people again and again. But this man is perhaps a rather extreme example, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he does stand out being on 9 boards. I mean, but he is only one of 285 others who are also sitting on numerous government quango boards. And so what we're really seeing from this is there's a complete lack of diversity, as you mentioned. And that's not only diversity in thought, but it's also lack of diversity in region, where these people are coming from, their political views. I mean, I'm sure Martin Spencer clearly must have a lot of experience, has a lot of good views that maybe he can contribute. But I don't think that being on Ofsted, the Companies House, and the Submarine Delivery Agency, I'm failing to see the link between all 3 of those, really.
I mean, wow, this man is a multitasker. We can certainly say that. But the thing is that these stats, I mean, I know we think there's a lot of quangos. I mean, there's a lot of quangos in this country. But I mean, I think if you ask most people, how many quangos are there? There'll be a health authority, there'll be, Ofcom, there'll be this and that. People might think there are a few dozen, right? I mean, just maybe a few dozen. There are more than 300 quangos in this country. Now, these are basically quasi-government organisations. They're funded by the state. They're a lot of these people are appointed in some way by the state. Everything's paid for by you and me. And they have a say over huge number of things that happen to us in our lives. But you and I, we get no say over how much people are paid or what these people do or the decisions they make. We need to scrap them, don't we?
No, I completely agree, and I really wish it was just a couple of dozen. As you say, it's getting on towards 400 now.
400?
And this Labour government, and this Labour government has now committed to introduce another 17 as well on top of that. And what we're seeing is really ministers, what they're doing, instead of actually making decisions themselves as the elected officials that we all vote for, it's ultimately being passed down onto these unelected quangocrats who, frankly, even from our own MPs, have very little scrutiny before they're appointed or even while they're in office as well. And so this is really part of what we're trying to do at the Taxpayers Alliance in our new campaign that we've launched today called Britain's Quangos Uncovered, is really lift the lid on Britain's Quango state to show who these people are and what these bodies are actually doing. Because as you say, I think a lot of your viewers don't quite realise the scope and the functions that these people are actually
I didn't realise it was that big. I mean, heading on for 4,000. It's absolutely extraordinary. I mean, most recently we heard about the Sentencing Council and their guidelines about basically treating defendants differently based on, if they were trans or from a minority, ethnic or religious view. And of course, even the government and the opposition said, oh no, this is awful, you shouldn't do that. And they went, phew, you haven't got any say of us, we can do what we want, they basically said. Completely out of touch with most ordinary people, out of touch even with the people who've appointed them. But how do we control them other than, them being controlled by elected, accountable people that we get to vote in and out of office?
Well, this is what I really think the government needs to do. And the reason why we launched this campaign is we fully support the government in its rhetoric about having a bonfire of the Quangos. Obviously, we heard that in the 2010s as well with David Cameron and George Osborne. But I think what we actually need to look at is where Cameron and Osborne's project failed, which is not in terms of reducing the numbers. Of course, reducing the numbers is a key component of that. But it's also looking at the functions of these bodies. Does the public sector need to be doing them in the first place? Yeah. And then secondly to that is, should this be directly under the control of the minister? Fundamentally, the case that you brought, the Sentencing Council, that's a great example. They were trying to override what the government wanted to do. The government almost had to actually legislate to stop them doing what they were doing, which was two-tier sentencing rules. And so ultimately, they reversed themselves. Well, I think a lot of your viewers are going to ask, why aren't the government in charge of that in the first place?
Exactly. That's the key thing. Again, if we're paying for it, I want accountable people. If they might be useless, but we can throw them out when they're useless. Darwin Friend, Head of Research at the Taxpayers Alliance, thank you so much for joining us. Do come on again soon. Tom Slater, seriously, I think we've missed a trick.
No.
We really need to get... This is the money train, this one.
Good money if you can get it as well. And you don't even have to turn up to what...
No one seems to be bothered.
You can miss that court at the meeting.
Well, again, and what expertise do you need? I have a funny feeling that I think if you're a Brexiteer, you think that trans women aren't women, you think that there should be borders of any sort. I'm pretty sure you don't get onto any of these
They're not going to let
boards.
you anywhere near that submarines regulator, which I
would be great
amused to find out even
submarines.
existed. But
I know. So we need to apply for some of these jobs. Tell you who should. Are you on any boards, Ian?